now going to go to review and vote on the Faka. And I just want to give the tick-borne disease members who are not on this committee a little background, and also the public a little background. So the committee that we had to work on the Faka, we have had many meetings. And we have had a lot of very really good conversations and debates, and really trying to figure out how we craft this and what we do. So just a little background for the public, the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group that we are in right now is a federal advisory committee that was created by Congress under the 21st Century's Cures Act that actually Pat Smith and Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey helped get into the 21st Century's Cures Act. It then became law, and it mandated that we had to have a Faka, a federal advisory committee, the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group, for 6 years with 3 reports coming out. And then it mandated that it would be sunset on December 13th of 2023, which is coming up. So this is the end of the Faka. So there are 2 ways to have a new Faka come out. One is we have Congress pass a law to create a new Faka. The other way is HHS has someone in their administration push to have the Faka, a new Faka. So with that, in order to get a new Faka, let's just say that next month Congress decides that, yep, we're going to pass a law and we're going to create a new tick-borne disease working group. To create a new one, let's just say it passes in December. To create a new one, it will take almost 2 years to get a new charter, to vet new Fed members and non-Fed members. So you have 2 years of that. And then when it starts, let's say they do their first year, they get recommendations out and they present it. We're really looking at the end of 2026 for a new Faka. And this would only happen if there's a law passed by Congress and if somebody in HHS in the administration wants to push it forward. So with that right now, that is not happening. It could happen tomorrow. We have no idea, but we need to be prepared if it does happen and if it doesn't happen. So what this committee worked very hard on, and we had very many meetings and we had very good debate, is to push forth a federal advisory committee recommendation. But then Ben also wanted to push forth a recommendation that is not a Faka. And his reasoning is that some of the feds, well, I'll start with this. So the CDC, NIH, and who else? USDA, they have to pay every year to have this tick-borne disease working group work. So they are paying more or less $300,000 a year to HHS to oversee the tick-borne disease working group. So that is $1 million every year these 3 agencies are paying. And Ben is feeling, and I think some other feds are feeling, that they would rather take that money and put it towards implementing the 70 plus recommendations that have come out of the past 6 years of the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group and the 3 reports. They also feel that it is a lot of time spent. They're spending 20% of their time with the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. So that is how they're feeling. So Ben proposed a recommendation of a non-Faka. I think some public members are feeling like, okay, and then including myself, that how do we stay engaged? How do we stay engaged with the government? How do we have a seat at the table? How do we hold the government's feet to the fire to make sure that they are taking these recommendations and hopefully now implementing them? And I think everyone on this working group could agree that we are now ready to start implementing these recommendations. With that being said, we have the national strategy coming out on vector disease. But I think the public, and I know myself, speaking for myself, is how are we still involved with the government? Because I'm worried that when the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group ends, everyone just goes back in their corner and we're not working together. So that is where we've kind of ended up with these two, one a FACA, one a recommendation. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to let Lyndon talk about this too. We're going to open it up for discussion with the working group. And then we are going to vote, and we can edit, since I know some of the working group that is not a part of the committee has not seen, and maybe has seen or not seen. And if they want to edit, have questions, comments, concerns, we can all do all that. But then what we'll do is we will vote on the FACA separately, and we will vote on Ben's recommendations separately. You can vote for both. You don't have to vote for either. You can vote for one or the other, but they will be two separate votes. So I hope that sort of covered it. Lyndon, am I missing anything? Please feel free to chime in here, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, that was very transparent in terms of the discussions. I guess I would just say that the character of the discussions was very productive. I think everybody recognizes that we need to do something different going forwards, and that we're at a different phase of what's needed to help push things forwards for patients, for tick-borne disease research. I think the discussions were all, as you stated, around what the best way to do that is and how to best keep people engaged and getting input. And I think there were differences of opinion there, but I think the discussions we had were very productive and collegial. I'll stop there.
I 100% agree, and very informative on both sides. Ben.
Thanks, Holiday. And if I could just elaborate one thing, I think our concern at CDC, if I can, and I apologize in the sense that the formal rationale for this didn't get added till just this morning, but while the cost of it to us, and it's not USDA, it's really just the HHS operating divisions. So CDC, NIH, and FDA have been paying. I don't think CMS has paid for this, but Rebecca can elaborate. But that's really not the biggest part of this. Because we all see that as part of our jobs. I think it is true in terms of stewardship. Yeah, we could use the money and the time and the resources more toward implementation, but that is actually the point. It's we have over 70 recommendations now, counting the current report. And a handful of these have been implemented. And I think I put this into an email to Leith and Jennifer, in a section of the report I think they're working on in terms of what is the progress that's been made. And it's actually been pretty significant. And I went through all the different recommendations from the three reports and pointed out what has been done to address these. But the bigger issue is that now we've evolved to a state of implementation and operations, which is really not what I see as a critical role of a federal advisory committee. The federal advisory committees, as I understand them, make recommendations to the federal government, but they're not. The role is of where we are with implementation and operations is something that we need to handle inside the government. And also, science takes time. And so the process, I was offering up is that, yes, great progress has been made, and we need to maintain an open door. We need to maintain ongoing dialogue. And it's just the question, is a federal advisory committee the best way to do this? Or can we accomplish this through another approach? And I think in the presentation that Sue and Kristen made yesterday, there was a whole list of opportunities and avenues to maintain a conversation. So, the recommendation I was proposed would maintain opportunities for meaningful communication, also regular updates on progress that's been made, and opportunities to obtain feedback formally on where to go from here, but short of a federal advisory committee. And I'll stop with that. Sorry.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for that. And you are correct. I did misspeak. It wasn't USDA, it is FDA that is one of the participants that pays $300,000 a year for this. Betty.
Thanks. And thank you, Ben, for your comments. So one of my thoughts is that with regard to
Betty, you are breaking up. This is not the time to be breaking up, Betty.
structure of the Federal Advisory Committee, we're looking at prioritization. So that gives the public input on what we, the public, think is important for you to act on first, because I'm not sure that how people prioritize, and it would be nice to make sure that there was input and that things could sync together on that. And so I think if we're just doing that, giving recommendations in that regard, it wouldn't be a massive undertaking of this new group, but it still is a way to communicate directly with the public, and the public really having an important voice in that prioritization process. So for me, that's really one of the things. But I agree, we do not need to recreate the same advisory committee. We are in a different place. But I still think this is a huge bridge. I can't tell you the importance of this bridge to the Lyme and other tick-borne disease community. Look at what's happened with alpha-gal people. They really got out and got heard. And so I think this bridge has been important for funding. There has been a lot of push from the patient community to lobby for you to get more funding because we know you need it. And so I hate to see the bridge go away.
I agree, Betty. Thank you. Ben, your hand was up and then it was down. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just say that absolutely agree that we need to maintain conversation, and I think that certainly is a significant part of the recommendation I was putting forward, that would be maintained in a meaningful way. And I think in terms of the issue of prioritization, I think that can be done through the same process, getting feedback on, well, we've got all these, what are people's thoughts on what should be done first? And a lot of that is determined by funding. I mean, we do what we have funding that we can do, and often we address the low-hanging fruit, things that could be done on the funding that we have. I think if you look back at the recommendations that have been implemented, you'll see that they go all the way across the gamut of areas. And I think finally, prioritization also is achieved through the national strategy effort and the agency action plans that are coming out of there.
But with the national strategy effort, a lot of that is done. A lot of the strategy and framework was developed without, the patient input at the inception. I mean, at least that's how it comes across. And so it's kind of like an afterthought. And so with the advisory committee that's narrowed its focus, then it's not an afterthought. They're really right there. And listening sessions or getting feedback is great, but it's really not transparent because it's not out in the public view. So that's kind of like, I like the transparency of the.
Yeah, but one last comment. I see Lee's hands up. See, I would just emphasize that the sessions that we want to have would be fully public, fully transparent, and that would be the important questions that we posed. Would be things like, of these recommendations, we'd really be interested in hearing your feedback on which ones are the highest priorities. So I think that can be fully accomplished within the venue that I'm recommending without a federal advisory committee. But I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Ben. Alith?
Thank you, Holiday. So I guess I want to foot stomp what Ben just said with regards to the public nature of those listening sessions. There's no restriction there with regards to how narrow, how transparent those would be. I mean, those are by nature meant to be open forums. The other piece I wanted to come back to, Betty, and I'm glad you brought up the national plan, is that I think Sue made a really good point yesterday, and Kristen, around the bookending of the RFIs. that the external input and I think wide dissemination of outreach for input was not an afterthought. That those comments, those viewpoints are curated, I think, in a powerful way. At least the RFIs I've been involved with, they're really meaningful touch points for us to build a lot of our starting places from, because in many instances, the federal government needs to be looking out to see what the landscape is like to help inform what we're going to do moving forward. So I do think that there are a few touch points built in, but I do appreciate your comments with regards to having that continued meaningful engagement. So I hope that we're able to maybe flesh out during this period where some of those things can be discussed. I think just in a way that we've already been doing. So I'll stop there. I see Dennis has his hand up.
Thank you, Leif. Dennis?
Thank you. So each of us is imagining a different view of what the possibilities might look like. So I'm going to try and paint a verbal picture of a place where I spent 10 years of my time before moving into more formal discussion areas. And that's on antimicrobial resistance, where in 1999, the government, CDC, FDA, and NIH formed an interagency working group on antimicrobial resistance. We had over 10 government agency representatives, and we had a series over those 10 years of 3 large public meetings where we funded people to come in to central points, had 60 or more participants, and an invited speaker list, and over usually a 3-day period, cultivated and curated, that's the word I'm looking for, a series of recommendations on what we needed to do to get our arms around the global problem of AR, antimicrobial resistance, from within the US space. And we had, I think we started with 80 some actions total in our action plan. It was a public health action plan on antimicrobial resistance. I think at one point we had over 100. And after doing this over a 10-year period and having those meetings, we moved to a different setting. And here is the part that you'd want to focus on is what does it look like to have continued engagement without this investment of time, money, and funds to keep adding recommendations. So we switched to an annual public update. And we did it in association with the largest national meeting of its kind. I think it was the Infectious Diseases Society of the Americas. And that generally ends at noon on the last day of the meeting. We booked the afternoon of that day where each of the member agencies from the action plan would get up and present their accomplishments toward the stated remaining actions. And then at the end of the day, we had an extended public dialogue with open mic, where people could either write in comments ahead of time or register to make comments at the meeting, and they could bring up a point that had some amount of discussion. So there's an example of a concerted effort that had public engagement at the beginning. I would say that's sort of like our 5 or 6 years together with these plans. The arrival at a list that didn't get a whole lot different after like the 3rd time through, and then a carryover process that had meaningful dialogue with the stakeholders moving forward. So it could look like that. That's just an example, Betty, on how we can have interface with the communities on actions that we've had several cycles of refining to get to where we are, and gave more energy for implementation as we move forward.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. I'm just going to chime in here for a second, and then Jennifer, I will have you speak. I'm going to speak on behalf of, I think, the Lyme and tick-borne disease community that, I think they finally felt heard and relevant being asked to be a part of this tick-borne disease working group, on having patients, doctors, scientists who've been studying this on the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group with federal members. And I think, it is sunsetting. It is what it is. But I think, I think they're very worried that it's just going to go poof and no one's going to care about them anymore, and they're not going to have a voice, and they're not going to be able to say, hey, you know, what's going on here, what's going on there. So I do feel like we have to figure out how to keep the dialogue going. And in full transparency, when we were working on Ben's recommendation, which we'll pull up in a minute, you know, he originally suggested having webinars, and I think Betty and myself and Jennifer, our heads almost popped off, because webinars to me just seem like somebody's talking at you and you're not getting any feedback, interaction, having your point made. Ben has, since we've moved on to more engaging areas. But I think what I'm also concerned with is who's going to be overseeing this implementation in the government, you know, and are patients and people in the tick-borne disease community going to be, you know, have a say in that or not? Now, I understand the Faka is, we're just supposed to give recommendations and advice, and that's it. But it comes down to, if the feds are now the ones overseeing the implementation, you know, since this has taken so long to just get where we are, I just don't want to see us going backwards. So I'll leave it there. Jennifer? You're on mute.
Okay,
there.
Thank you. Sorry, as my curate was not cooperating. Okay, so just a couple of notes that I made that I wanted to bring up. First of all, Holiday, in your excellent summary a while ago, you accidentally said that the 21st Century Cures Act sunsets in December of 2023. It sunsets this December 2022.
Right. Sorry, yes, 2022. You are correct.
I just wanted to make sure
Thank
that
you.
everybody knew that.
Keeping me on toes.
Yeah. So yesterday, when we went over the core values for the working group, the ones around innovation really stood out to me, and especially that we want to keep what works and then transform outdated paradigms, right? And so I really appreciate this conversation of looking at, for all of us, what works and what doesn't. I think the great thing about Ben's proposal that'll come up on the screen is it can be done immediately. And if we do ever get approval for another federal advisory committee, it's going to be a while. We need to continue the momentum. That said, I would love to know, there is one gap that was brought up in the presentation yesterday by Dr. Honey and Dr. Visser, is that the National Vector-Borne Disease Strategy doesn't cover access to care, service provision, reimbursement payments, and that's a whole another set of agencies. So there's that, right? It's like there's still a gap, and so I just want to put that out there, that's, you know, a concern. It's like, how do we deal with that? I don't really know if I have an answer, but it would remain a gap regardless of what we do here.
Thank you, Jennifer. Betty?
Go ahead and let someone else have a say before
Sure.
you come back to me, right?
Sure. Todd?
Yes, thank you. So I think what I'm going to say here, I don't think anybody might disagree with, is that I think we're definitely at the stage we need to do something. You know, I've been on this for about, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And the very first year I said, we need better diagnostics. What I'm saying this year is we need better diagnostics. And if we continue to have Fakas until we all get old and retire, I'll be saying we need better diagnostics. What I need to actually implement. And, you know, I'm not sure what is, you know, I know what we put up in the form of the report, but I'm not seeing a lot of action coming back down to us, right? And this is partially why I do like the national strategy that CDC has been working on, and that's because ultimately, and I think quicker, it will actually start to get a mandate, at least for the FDA and possible funding resources to actually start to work on implementing these things. And when we go out and implement it, we're not all going to be working on the same thing, because each agency has their own box. Mine is around regulations, right? And around the regulatory aspect. So we would not be funding anything that would be determined as basic science in that kind of sense. We might fund things that revolve around regulatory science. But as it stands now, I've got no mandate to do any of that funding. And it's kind of frustrating, because we have lots of tick-borne diseases out there. And we just can't take funds from things that are being coded as, COVID or Ebola or any of your other favorite diseases and apply it to the tick-borne disease. I need a mandate, right? And I think, that's the most important thing from our aspect, because at that point, now we're actually doing something to help the public. Right now, I feel as if I'm just talking, right? And we just talk. I don't want to cut off the engagement. As Jennifer said, we need to continue. We need to continue now. But I don't want to continue doing what we're doing now, which is, I feel like we're in a hamster wheel. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Thank you, Todd, for that. And we really appreciate it. And I agree. And also, Jennifer is correct. Ben's recommendation can start literally today. So that's something to good. Before I get to Gabby, I'm just going to make a public service announcement out to the public out there that you really should be calling your Congress people, your senators, your representatives, and saying, we need more funding for tick-borne diseases. That is how these feds will get funding to do what we want them to do. So it comes back to Congress. So please reach out to your people and say, CDC needs more money for tick-borne diseases. How do we get that? You can also say that you want the Faka to go too. Okay, Gabby.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been looking at the recommendations that are on the table today, both for and against, or for not having a federal advisory committee. I see benefits with both of them. I also understand the concerns that some people have given for each of the recommendations. And the way that I see both of them is that they only get part of the way towards the intent for what this working group wants to achieve. So the overall intent is to make progress towards implementing the recommendations that come out of our working group. And each of those recommendations for a Faka or not having a Faka kind of gets there, but I don't think they are comprehensive in the overall requirement, to use a Department of Defense term, to have a process that is transparent, where the government is held accountable and the public or non-federal participants are empowered to help affect the change and implement the recommendations. And the way that I see it, and I can maybe use an analogy from the DoD. So the Department of Defense has an acquisitions process. We generate requirements to have equipment made for the military, for example, or build structures. And so in the requirement, we might say, we need a new house, but then we don't go out and say how we're going to build that house. We define where the structure is and the framework for it, and we let someone else build the house. And I recognize that, resources need to be allocated towards building the house, in this case, towards implementing the recommendations. But I don't think it's our job to say how we're going to do it, but rather to say, this is what we need, and these are the goalposts that we need to have in place in order to have the recommendation that I think will be the type of recommendation that everyone will be happy with. And that's not to say I'm for or against either recommendation, but just to say I don't think either one really gets to where everyone needs it to be for everyone to feel okay with either of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Monica just texted me, and she put something in the group chat that I'm going to read to everyone since she is traveling today and listening. Dr. Monica Ember says, with all due respect, tick-borne disease is not like any other topic in public health. With all of the patient suffering and disagreement, the ability to bring all stakeholders to the table in order to promote change is essential. So that is Monica's comment there. Let's go next to Rebecca, please.
Sure. Just want to go back to Jennifer's comment. I've been in close with regards to access to care and some of what's going on in terms of management of patient care going forward. It's a complex situation. I think Leith and I have been in lots of discussions about, well, where do we start? And the challenge, I think Todd said it most clearly, we're stuck, some of the challenges around diagnostics leads to many of our access and equity issues. I mean, that getting to better diagnostics is essential. It's part of the reason I actually asked for a follow-up discussion on the framework to make sure we're talking about diagnosis and therapeutics. CMS is really providing care. It's not at the table for some of those pieces because that comes out of FDA decision-making along with partnership with NIH. So while it's helpful for us to be involved, really some of those essential things that need to happen in those other agencies. That said, that's probably why our placement of the chapter around access is really important, in that because we don't have certainty around diagnostics and therapeutics, creating a space for clinicians to practice good medicine and do shared decision making is essential. And so that's where our chapter comes in and gets to those issues. So, I commend my colleagues in the agencies that are really at work rolling up their sleeves on this, and think that is a really important next step to getting to equity and access to care issues. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. So now what I'd like to do, if it's okay, and we can still keep the discussion going. Kat, can we pull up the whiteboard, and can we have the Faka and Ben's? I know we had them both on. Why don't we start with the Faka of just looking at, editing it. If anybody wants to add, have conversation, whatever. Ben did just give us the rationale today, and we probably do need to go through that. I actually do have a couple things, edits in there that I'd like to discuss, but I think if we start with, if we could start with this, and if everyone could just read that and the rationale, and I will make sure I've got hands up so I can see what's going on. And if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns about it, please raise your hand and we can go through it. If there's anything you want to edit. But this, these recommendations and Faka was a long time coming. Gabby.
Yeah, Kat, can you please scroll down to so we can see the alternate language? Thank you.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, that's the language.
Yeah. So actually, Kat, this last one is the one we're going with now.
Okay, I wasn't sure if these were simultaneous.
Yeah, so this is
okay. Let me put this underneath here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, wasn't sure.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, get rid of that one.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns? Editing.
74 recommendations.
Great.
Where is this?
Thank you, Kirby.
In the rationale where it says XX.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Jennifer. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I think my only comment would be that it needs, if we go with another federal advisory committee in the future, it needs to look way different than this one has in terms of time and expenditure. Because, I mean, if you think about, they brought up yesterday that it's basically an unfunded mandate. All these agencies have to pull money, and it is literally millions of dollars of staff time that have gone into this. I did a very rough back of the napkin estimate of just the feds in today's meeting. It's got to be $10,000 to $20,000 a day for all of y'all to be in this meeting. And in addition, all the volunteers and our unpaid hours. But so it's got to look different. That's my caveat here, is that we can't keep doing it the old way.
Well,
Betty, hang on a second. Lyndon? Lyndon, you're on mute.
Actually, Jennifer just made my point for me. I was going to say the exact same thing with a question as to, in this request, whether there's a way to limit, the scope of this new federal commission that would be acceptable. Because I think what we heard in committee was exactly the concerns about the amount of time and effort and money it took and diverted from actual implementation. And I think that's fair. And kudos to the people who've been on this for 6 years. I mean, this is so much work, and I totally get that. Is there a way in our language, and I don't know if this is something Jim or Kay would speak to, where in our request we could kind of stipulate parameters or limits as to what the next committee would do? Because I think in the implementation phase, because things are going to progress slower in the implementation, they don't need to meet as we have with all these subcommittees and constant meetings. I think it could look very different. And I would agree that the need for transparency, that this is working pretty well. I think, us getting to know each other and a different rotating group of people getting to know each other is useful. I think having worked with everybody for the last year and a half, I'm absolutely confident that everybody on this committee is focused on improving the health of people with tick-borne diseases. There's no doubt. I think there's a benefit to getting that understanding by working together. And I think we live in an era of unprecedented doubt in our government. And so things that are working well, that have given transparency, I think there are reasons to keep it going in some form. So I'll stop there.
I agree with you, Lyndon. Thank you. Jim and Kay, I have a question for you. I know that let's say Congress approved a FACA, they voted on it, it's a bill. Wouldn't the charter state because they have to write a new charter, wouldn't the charter state how many meetings more or less they could have, or could it be in the FACA, or could it be in both?
Holiday, this is Jim. I'll address that. Yeah, basically whatever comes down from, if Congress mandates another federal advisory committee, we would put in the charter what they mandated. For example, the composition of the membership, and then the other things would be dependent on how many meetings were going to be held. And the report that we recently had, it mandated a report to Congress. That might not be a requirement. That might be a report that goes to the Secretary of HHS to with those recommendations and for going forward. And certainly whenever we put in something in the charter, we put down the frequency of the meetings. This last requirement for Congress, because of the report going to Congress and the chapters, it was very intensive and involved to get the recommendations in that format. Other committee meetings that don't have that requirement for report going to Congress, they don't have the requirement or need to meet so frequently. So certainly that could be added in as part of the charter, and the charter serves as the guidelines. I don't know if that answered the question, Holiday.
So my question still is, could it be added? Could the time be added to the FACA, or is it kind of a nothing burger where we wouldn't need to, because it would still, the charter would do it?
The charter should do it. Whatever the frequency of the meetings are, you would put in there the Tick-Borne group will meet at least once a year or something to that equivalent.
Okay, so it's through the charter, not the FACA.
That's correct.
Understand. Okay.
Right. And Holiday, I'll just echo what Jim said.
Sure.
everything, the charter is basically your guiding principle, your guiding document. So it can be, this particular group meets X times per year. It really frames sort of the guiding principle for the FACA. So it all rests with the charter.
Okay, thank you. Betty?
Thank you. So I wonder if we respond to Jennifer, and of course this would not have the same structure because we're not doing the same task. And, as I think through it, if you get good decision makers, the first meeting is, here's the list of the recommendations, think about how we're going to prioritize. Then the next meeting is you prioritize, and then maybe talk about how you're going to monitor implementation. I mean, these are not going to be the same sorts of meetings or work that we've done in the past, because we don't need to recreate the past. We're creating the future. But this does allow us to continue to have that a partnership with the public that goes beyond just listening. It really is active seat at the table, which is so important, because my phone's been blowing up from the Lyme community about, we want more than just to be heard. We want to be in on the decision. But I think to your point about how do we kind of make it clear that we aren't envisioning this to be a heavy burden on the participants, we could put it wherever, if it ends up passing in the intro chapter, as describe the rationale and our thinking about what it would look like. You could put it right in there, so when they go to write the charter, they'll see kind of a blueprint.
Thank you, Betty. Dennis?
Yeah, so along those lines, I want to get to the point of unintended consequences. So certainly each federal advisory committee has its own purpose, its own charter, its own way of operating. Yet, aren't there minimal essential requirements once a FACA is established regarding needing to publish online the agenda X days ahead of the meeting? I think it's some pretty extended period of time ahead of that. And are there frequency of meeting things that need to take place that we don't want, that we'd be locked into by virtue of this being a FACA? I seem to recall there being an issue whenever we've scaled back on numbers of meetings in the several other FACA committees that I serve on.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. Okay, so now what I'd like to do, Kat, can we go to Ben's?
Yes, just one moment.
Don't we think someone could answer Dennis's question?
Sure, I can. Thanks. I can weigh in here. The FACA GSA has certain guidelines, and we all operate a FACA under the Sunshine Act. And so, yes, and because it's all public information and has to be presented to the public, we have 15 days for a notice that goes out. It goes out into the Federal Register notice saying that there is an upcoming FAC meeting, and that's to notify the public that the federal government is having this advisory committee meeting. So that is what Dennis talked about, sort of the specifications of that. So we're governed by the Sunshine Act, and so any meeting in a public space with the federal advisory members, we put that in the Federal Register. It says 15 days. It also talks about the ability for public comment. Every FACA has to have a public comment period, and that's also stipulated in that Federal Register notice. So I think that answered your question, Dennis.
I had the second part to that. It's really the central piece, and that is the frequency of the meetings. Is there a specification for a minimal number of meetings over a period of time? Because I thought there was.
That is written into the charter. It all varies. Like for example, HHS has over 200 federal advisory committees, and every charter says you shall meet at least 2 times, at least 4 times, at least. So it really depends on the particular federal advisory committee and the charter and what it's mandated to do.
Thank you, Kay. Ben?
Yeah, just had a question, Kay, for that. At what point does the charter get written? Who writes the charter? And I just want to make sure I understand, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And yeah, could you comment on that? Thanks.
Sure. The office that is responsible for setting up or running the FACA per se works on the charter, and then it gets sent through the HHS legal review and signed off by HHS officials. And then it's chartered, and it's a 2-year period typically, and then it has to be, if you will, re-reviewed and reauthorized. And that's every 2-year period for federal advisory committees.
Okay, can I just follow up with that? But so it's HHS who's writing the charter. There are no public members helping out with the charter. Is that correct?
That's correct. HHS would be writing the charter. Correct.
Okay. Ben, do you have another question? Okay. Kat, can you pull up Ben's recommendation and his rationale?
Make it a little smaller. Oh, it's a pretty long rationale. So maybe I might scroll down if that's okay.
Yeah, let's start with the recommendation, then we can go to the rationale.
Okay. Sorry.
All right. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please raise your hand. I will go first. Ben, in the rationale, like halfway down, it says significant progress has been made. I would beg to differ with that. Could we possibly, I don't think significant progress has been made.
Well, I think it depends on how you define significant progress. I was looking back over all the recommendations from previous reports, and there's a lot of work that's been made, and I'd be glad to summarize that for the group if you'd like to see that. I think it's all relative to the mountain that stands before us, though. In many ways, that just seems like, chipping away in very small ways at a huge amount of work that still remains. Now, I would argue that, we've implemented an entire national surveillance program for ticks and infections, and looking at national tick surveillance program. There's a lot that's been done, and that's just from CDC. And I don't.
Could we maybe, and we can have other people, could we maybe just say progress has been made instead of significant?
Sure. I just think the people who've been doing this stuff wouldn't consider it minimal. I mean, it's been a huge amount of person hours and activities and hundreds of thousands of budget dollars put into it, but it's all relative. I don't care. I'm not going to die on that line.
Okay, and I also agree that you guys have done a lot, but obviously there's so much more we need to be doing too, but thank you for that. Lyndon.
Sorry, just focusing on the recommendation and not the rationale. Are these two incompatible? Because they seem like, knowing that setting up a federal advisory committee is going to take time, it seems like the two could be compatible. You'd start with, this proposal. If it's going great and the Federal Advisory Commission gets started, you could incorporate a lot of what's being done here into that committee. If it's not going great, then at least you have the committee there. So they didn't seem, the rationales are incompatible, but the recommendations themselves did seem like they could work nicely together with just some minor rewording.
Agreed. Thank you. Betty?
Yes, thanks. So as a former administrator, I can tell you that if this is going well, we'll never get the Federal Advisory Committee, because it would be why? Why do you need it? And so that is one of my concerns, because people tend to take the path of least resistance, and I get that. But I want to scroll down to something in the rationale that I don't agree with. And it's the process is now at a juncture where the next best step must be determined for addressing the continuing challenges. And it's moving, so I lost it. So the need has evolved from assessing gaps in receiving recommendations to implementation. No, we skip prioritization. And that's where the public input is so important, because what the public thinks is important may not always line up with what agencies think is important. And it's one thing to allow the public to say what they important, but it's a different level of engagement if they're there setting priorities. So I just think that this is what skips that important step.
Ben, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
Betty?
I would just say that prioritization is a part of implementation. When you begin to implement something and you've got a whole bunch of things to implement, you have to prioritize what you're going to do based on manpower, based on funding that's available, based on what could be seen as low-hanging fruit. And I think the quality of that, is part of that as well. But I don't have a problem with prioritization. But the question is, Betty, who gets the loudest vote on prioritization? Is it the entomologist? Is it the diagnostic specialist? Is it the treatment? There's a lot. It's a complicated issue. And just like it was brought up yesterday, should we pick 5 of the top recommendations, and then that automatically puts people at odds. I mean, is prevention more important than treatment? Is diagnostics more important than surveillance? I think that all of these things are high priorities. And sometimes I have a hard time following that rationale. I think
someone's going to prioritize it.
Well, if you look at what we've been working on, it's been some of all of these, and that's just us. Oh, and one last thing while I'm talking, this is very HHS centric, and to the folks from other government agencies, DoD and USDA and others, I would certainly say we could broaden this to include, the other agencies. I just didn't feel like we had, that's beyond HHS. So all of that could be worked on as well.
Jennifer?
So I know I did suggest yesterday that we should pick our top 5. Maybe a different path in terms of prioritizing. If we as a group want to have input on that while we still exist, there are ways that we could do like a ranking, and everybody picks their top 5, and then we coalesce them all and put them in order. I'm just saying. Something else that I actually wanted to make a request, and I'm working on the wording, but if you'll scroll back, Kat, to the actual recommendation itself, I think one of the easiest ways for the public to see what's going on in real time would be a tool to have a tool like a dashboard or a scorecard. And that's something that, would, if it's updated, even if it's just updated quarterly or semi-annually, it'd be a way that we can watch and track progress so we can actually see. And that's, like Ben said, there's already some progress underway, and that would let us see in one place, oh, yes, this is happening, or has happened, or it hasn't happened yet. So I'll work on where we could add that in here.
Ben, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I think the challenge of a dashboards, really valuable. For example, CDC's COVID data tracker. If you go to that, you could back during, the real peak of the epidemic, you could see on day-to-day basis how changes are made. You could use things like Power BI to generate quick maps and output reports and things like this. I would just think that it kind of, a dashboard scares us a little bit, that terminology, because it means we have to have web people that are continually updating things. And I think that's kind of a tactic more than a strategy. And I think that, what we really want to see is the progress that has been made. And to Betty's point, I think in the language to share updates and receive feedback, I think feedback includes, what people think about priority, what should be prioritized. That is certainly part of feedback, what should be done, or something's more important than the others. I think we would be very eager to hear that. And so I'm just saying this doesn't preclude getting that type of information as well. And so I'll stop with that.
All right, Todd.
Yeah, so expanding on a little bit of what Lyndon had commented, is could we essentially put these together? Initially start out with the components of the non-Faka, and then maybe try to put in some kind of metrics to prove that it's working or not working. If it's working, then great. I know Betty said that, well, if it's working, we're not going to get a Faka, but then why complicate your lives if it's working, right? But also have some kind of measure in there that says, okay, non-Faka route is not working. So if it's not working, the default will then be, okay, now let's establish a new Faka, doing something again differently. So basically put them together, non-Faka recommendation first, so that we can start immediately doing everything we need to do to implement it. Put some, and I don't know what these are, but put some kind of metrics in so that we can determine the success of that in case we have to go for a more formal route, if you will, with the Faka.
Okay, thank you. I would have to ask then Kay and Jim if that's even possible, legal, all the above, because I don't know who would be overseeing it, if it's working, if it's not. It seems like it could get messy, I think, what might happen. Betty, your hand's up.
I was just going to reiterate that this other feedback is not the same as being in on helping craft the priorities. And the reason I didn't like Jennifer's idea for making our priorities in this cycle is because it came late in the game, one, and two, it still wouldn't have any effect on the previous two reports that came before. That's why I just want somebody who can read and
what was the last thing you said, Betty? You broke up.
Sorry, my internet is unstable today. I just was wanting a process where we engage the public in the process of prioritization, where they actually are in on the decision.
Okay, thank you, Betty. Ben?
Yeah, I would just add that, when I originally drafted this, things like workshops and feedback, I mean, these are very general terms. They weren't meant to be, condescending or minimalist. I think, a better job was done at this maybe in the presentation yesterday on national strategy that Sue and Kristen gave, where they mentioned such things as co-creation workshops and collaboration. I mean, these things are all doable and welcome. And we want, at the end of the day, we want significant conversations to continue. It's just, does this require all of the issues of a federal advisory committee, the cost and uncertainties and all of that that lie ahead? And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Okay, does anybody have any? Oh, Kirby.
Yeah, I mean, we went through the first two rounds. I thought the first two reports were fairly comprehensive overall. And as we came here on this round, coming up with recommendations, there were still a few holes to be filled, obviously, and issues. But at the same time, I suspect all the subcommittees had to struggle with basically not rehashing the ground that had already been covered by the previous two, redentions of the committee's work. And if you have another FACA, how are we going to prevent just basically spending a lot of time rehashing what's already been done? As Ben says, the science doesn't move that fast, and we need to implement these recommendations, and we need to see that they're being recommended. But I'm really concerned about dragging in, having more subcommittees again, and having people basically try to come up with new recommendations, because you'll end up with a similar structure. And that's really what I'm concerned. And I don't want to have us ended up rehashing all these recommendations again and yet again and yet again, because they aren't really going to change all that much. I think, if you're saying that they need to readdress this, that means we didn't really do a good job of coming up with recommendations. Or did the previous
We're not saying
subcommittees?
Betty, hang on, please. Kirby, thank you for this. Betty?
Yeah, so Kirby, I think you missed the point of the FACA recommendation is not to generate new recommendations. It's to, let's look at the 74 we have and can we prioritize among them? And yes, there will be winners and losers whenever you prioritize, but someone's going to prioritize these, so why not let them do it in concert? So no, it's not create more recommendations, not rehash the recommendations. It's just to say which rise to the fore, which can we do because of we're close on them already, versus which we really must do because they are the most important. And so, no, the whole intent of this new FACA is it's different. It is not the old way. But I will point out in the Access to Care Committee, we did tackle a whole big something totally new that wasn't tackled before. But I think we have enough recommendations. It's time to prioritize them.
Well, I would
Lyndon?
agree. I think the way the
Sorry,
FACA
Kirby.
recommendation was worded, you've actually got recommendations in there, and there's nothing in there about monitoring progress. I agree you need to keep an engagement with the Lyme community. I think that's very important, and I would certainly agree with that. But I'm just concerned about how a new FACA would ultimately end up being structured and end up doing what we've been doing the past 6 years.
Lyndon?
So with what Kirby said in mind, can we pull up the FACA recommendation again and see if we can shape the wording a little bit now that we've gotten guidance from Kay and Jim about what we can recommend, so that we put some limits that might be more acceptable to people? So would it be possible to put in some wording that says meeting no more than once or twice a year or something like that? So rather than a minimum, put a maximum in, since that's the major concern, I think, of some of the people in terms of the impact on actually doing the work. Could we put that in somewhere? If you want to take out the generate new recommendations so that you avoid that concern that Kirby just raised, would that make it more palatable to people? Just throwing those things out there. And so, Kat, if we put in a limit, let's see where it would go. you could put it at the very end, this FAC would be limited to meeting no more than twice yearly or something like that.
But
Hang
Linda,
on, hang on, Betty, Gabby.
Yeah, so a lot of the recommendations are for increased funding. That's not necessarily something that a FACA could do. But what a committee or some group of people, whatever we call it, could do is kind of monitor progress towards funding some of the recommendations and seeing if the objective to develop new or better diagnostics or vaccines or therapeutics or whatever the recommendation is, if those are being progressed on, separate from the FACA, but in industry or academia, for example. So there wouldn't necessarily be a lot of hands-on work. A lot of this might just be monitoring to see what's going on in our landscape around us.
I will say, and I think Jim and Kay could chime in here. I do think the FACA, we're not allowed to monitor. The word monitor is not allowed to be used. If I'm correct, we have to say advise and recommendations. I think those are our only two words, correct? Jim and Kay, we cannot monitor.
It depends on a charter. There are some charters that use the words monitor. So it really relies on the side of what a charter specifies. There are some that use the word implementation, they use monitor.
But the problem
around a strategy, for example, around a national strategy, FACA says it will monitor and advice and counsel on the implementation of X strategy.
But the charter is created by HHS, so the public doesn't have any input to it. So we would have no idea what the charter would be saying that the FACA could do, correct?
That is correct. The charter is developed by HHS or the governing of the FAC.
Okay. Betty?
it has to do with limiting to no more than twice yearly, for example. So, any new committee is going to need one committee meeting to get organized, two then to do some work and report back. And then, so the first year it's likely to need 3 meetings. So I just don't want to tie the hands with something. So, the people on the advisory committee are intelligent people. They'll know what they need to get their work done. So I hate to send a maximum there, but I think we can anticipate.
All right, so do we want to say no more than 3 times yearly? Ben?
I wasn't commenting on that specific twice or 3 times or whatever. It was really on Gabby's comment and on prioritization and funding and things like that.
Okay. Do you want to speak?
Shall I speak?
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
Just want to make sure. Yeah. So, we just say a lot of just to explain a little bit about how we work at CDC, because it's a little bit different than the other federal agencies. We have line items for almost all of our diseases, and those line items in the appropriation tell us what our priorities are. And they also tell us what we spend the money on. And so in terms of funding, these recommendations that more funding should be spent on blah, 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 that's kind of ambiguous, I think, and Dennis can speak on this, but, NIH might interpret a recommendation like that they need to issue a NOFO or an RFA, a funding announcement that they make that. For us, it's more like that money comes to us in appropriations, and then we do what it says for us to do. And so it's a little, that's how those decisions get made for us. And it's not like CDC has this huge kitty of money and we're misspending our money because we're putting too much on COVID and not enough on Lyme, or too much on HIV and not enough on influenza. It just doesn't work like that for us. So that's just a point of clarification.
Okay, Kirby.
Well, then how about the wording? I mean, that second line, you said the prioritization, implementation, and progress of the recommendations of the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. And then again, really the question is, how do they actually do that? I mean, the structure of this one was that you had subcommittees, they generated a report, which then turned around and generated the actual, the subcommittee met, and those subcommittee reports then were in turn used to generate the chapters for the report for each report to Congress. So
I think it would come back to the charter.
Right. Well, is there any language that would, I don't know. I just don't want to see us rehashing what we've done for the past 6 years and how you can get that in there. I mean, my inclination is not to support a FACA if it's gonna. I agree with the engagement of the Lyme community and the public and so forth. I think that's really important. But at the same time, I just don't want us to get us stuck into basically doing what we've been doing for the past 6 years. And you said that's how the charter's constructed, but to make this more acceptable, is there a way to word this so that, to help guide that charter construction? I don't know. Because he said it's totally up to NIH is how that is done.
Totally up to HHS of how that's done. Rebecca?
Yeah, Ben, to follow out what you're saying, and that's extremely important information to understanding the budgeting and how that works. It seems like then it would somewhat fly in the face of prioritization if the two aren't aligned, and I'm not sure how they line up. Can you help make the connection? Like, it's just an honest question, because that makes total sense to me that there's line item budget for different things. And so I don't know how that would work with prioritization. Do you have any examples of how that might have worked in the past, just for open transparency discussion?
I can, and I'm going to speak in real general terms because I don't have our appropriation language in front of me right now, and it's not my place to speak on this. But I would just say that every year we get a budget from Congress, and there's an appropriation. It's in multiple lines for CDC. And when we get a funding line, if we get an increase in $10,000 a year, for example, often that says, and this funds will be used to extend CDC's regional centers of excellence for vector-borne diseases. So that spells out that we have $10 million that we have to give out for this, and it will say, or 30 million, and it will emphasize increased funding to state health departments and municipalities for improved Lyme disease surveillance. That spells out, and that translates into a priority for us into how we spend our money. And so yeah, that's if that helps.
I think it does. Thank you. I think, the only way that this really helps then is if HHS is really involved in making sure they would listen to the advisory committees and help with that budgetary piece. So there's a whole lot of pieces that need to come together for, in effect, what we're suggesting to happen. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. A lot of things have to come together, and what's true for CDC is not necessarily true for NIH and FDA and CMS for that.
For sure. Thank you.
Todd?
Yeah, so I guess 2 points. One on the funding for our agency. If it's not, and I'm not a budget person, so I may not even be telling you exactly how it's coming down. But if it's not coded in such a certain way, and if it says tick diseases and it goes out to some centers, for instance, they may use that money to hire new reviewers that may only work on tick-borne diseases, 0.1% of their time. But should a product come in that is devoted for tick-borne diseases, then they would be put on that. So it's very important for us to have it also coded in a specific way. The other thing is that if just sitting here listening to the conversation is part of, I guess, my concern on keeping a FACA going is, just in this conversation alone, we already had mission creep. Well, one meeting, no, we need 2 meetings, no, we need 3 meetings, no, now we need this and that and this. And it's kind of like, in the end of the day, we're just going to be repeating what we've done, and just keep repeating what we've done is just, kind of the definition of insanity when you get no different outcome, right? So that's the only comment I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Betty?
Well, just to point out, I guess it's not clear. This advisory committee ends. Its task was to identify gaps. We've done that. But what we're proposing with this new was the prioritization of the work that's been done. So it's not going to rehash what's been done. It's saying we're taking what the recommendations and getting our input to what we think should come first. And I think that if you had the right people at that table, it doesn't have to be so laborious. You get the people from the various agencies, you get the public members with subject matter expertise, and you just hammer it out. So it's not a rehab. It would be a mistake. You're right, Todd. It would be a mistake to do the same thing over again. Out.
Thank you, Betty. Gabby?
Yeah, I move we recess for lunch after Ben's comment.
Yes. So we will recess for lunch after Ben's comment. We will come back. We will have one more discussion, and then we will vote on both of these. Ben.
Yes, thanks, Holiday. Yeah, just to, I do have a little bit of language in front of me right now, and this is actually very revealing. This was our Senate language, the approved language for FY23. So that as you know, we're under continuing resolution right now, so this isn't in effect, but this is the language for Lyme appropriations. There's a $5.5 million increase, and it specifies these things: that it expands the programs authorized under the K-Hagen Tick Act, that it develop and implement methods to improve surveillance, that work to improve early diagnosis of Lyme and related tick-borne diseases, that we coordinate our work with NIH, that we include in our surveillance activities the long-term effects on patients. So Betty, to your point, this prioritizes what we do, over the next few years, or actually for this year. And you can see it actually aligns quite well with priorities of the working group. I think it hits a number of important issues here, but this is how, our work is prioritized. And we can't really, and this trumps any recommendation of the FACA that goes against this. It's what Congress is telling us we have to do.
Thank you, Ben, for that. Okay, so since we are 10 minutes behind, we're going to push lunch we'll come back at 12:40. So 12:40 Eastern time is when we'll come back for lunch. We can chat about this a little bit more, and then we will vote. So thank you all very much. All righty, it is 12:40. I hope everyone had a lovely lunch. And we are back. So we are going to continue the discussion about the FACA and the recommendation. So if anyone has anything that they would like to add to the discussion, we'll talk for about another 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will vote. So is there anyone that has any comments, questions, or concerns or edits? Ben.
Thanks, Holiday. I sent sort of a slightly revised non-FACA recommendation that I think helps accommodate some of the concerns that people have, including the whole idea that this would also involve other relevant federal departments, not just HHS. And, you know, I sent that by email just so everyone could see it kind of in track changes. I see Kat got that. So I don't know if she wants to show that or if you'd like me to show my screen.
Can you pull it up and Kat, can you pull it up and we'll look at Ben's edits?
Yep, I think I'm on the wrong one. Just hold on one second. I pull up the right one. It is the not, no, it's the, yes, here we are. Okay.
And it just leaves out the specification of semi or annual. I mean, I think we could do that at as certainly as needed and as warranted. And so and then, you know, emphasizing really co-creation, trying to get rid of some, you know, make this a little bit more specific that it would be in technical consultations that this would allow for what I think would be more substantive input and discussions, and then increase also involving other federal relevant federal departments as well, not just HHS. And then striking town halls, because that sounds a little bit, you know, kind of top down as well, but just say engagement sessions. But these are just some suggestions about how it could be modified.
Great, thank you, Ben. Betty?
Can you hear me? Sorry, guys.
Yep.
I'm having some trouble with my video. So Ben, can you tell me more about the process? So when you're seeking this input, where are you in the process for gathering input? Is it after things have been created? Is it at the inception? Is it at the inception and throughout?
Yeah, I think what what I would envision is just that we would start out with updates, you know, by maybe a very comprehensive looking at all of the different recommendations that have been made, and that maybe all of us who these recommendations have an impact on would start by giving kind of an update on where we are with implementation to date. And directly to your point, it would be ongoing. You know, we would do this in an ongoing way. But I could see this could start, you know, really soon. I don't know how soon. I mean, this is kind of maybe OSM, you know, Leith or someone could speak about the feasibility of that, because I am in this and sort of suggesting that they would do this just because of the involvement that we already have with their office through the national strategy. It'd make that a lot more easy to make sure those two processes flow together.
Okay, Gabby?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to something Lyndon said before we broke for lunch about starting the ball rolling with the non-FAC recommendation, and then maybe sort of doing, you know, establishing the Federal Advisory Committee, and then moving that ball as well. So this might be a question for Ben or anyone at, anyone in HHS. What would be the risk of rolling the non-FACA recommendation into the FACA recommendation so that one precedes the other, with the understanding that the ball would be rolling to establish a FACA at some point, whatever that point is, in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, according to the timeline that HHS sets for it, and leaving it to HHS to determine if that is a sensible thing to do once we start this process moving.
So
Yeah,
we can have Jim and we could have Jim and Ben and Kay speak to this. I will tell you that with these two, they have to be two separate votes. They can't be smushed together. Ben, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I would just say that I don't see, while that kind of sounds like a compromise that could work, in the way I look at that in my own mind is that it's the same people doing all the same work. And so it's double the amount of work. And but also beyond that, it kind of gets to the fact of we're into implementation, operations, prioritization, and again, I think that those are activities that are best carried out by HHS and the other departments, and not functions of Federal Advisory Committee. And as I mentioned before, in terms of prioritization, it really comes down to budget appropriations, at least for us at CDC. And so I would just say that I understand that for everyone else, this is sort of a both and, but for me, I mean, just quite honestly, it's kind of an either or. And in terms of the way I need to vote as a federal representative, but yeah, I can stop with that.
Lyndon?
Thanks for sending this, Ben. I think looks good, and it's actually in some ways more than what the public is getting with the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group currently. I think the one thing it doesn't address is, again, speaking about the environment we live in, where there's a lot of distrust for government. I think a lot of this depends on trusting all of you to have this happen. And I think, there are reasons to trust you, absolutely, because I think you've done a lot of this stuff and you've gone above and beyond some of the things that the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group has asked for. But I think from a public perception point, I do still worry. And I think people will want to see some of this locked in, honestly, so that they know that it's going to happen. And other than that, I really like it. I like what you're proposing. I think, and one thing to explain to the people who weren't there for some of the explanations we got from Kay and Jim, and the technical consultations, are somewhat similar to what the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group does. I think they do have to rotate their members more frequently, but it is a selected group of people who are asked to consult. So it does replicate some of the functions of the current FACA.
Thanks, Lyndon. Ben, do you have something?
Yeah, I'm going to say this real quickly, and I see Leith's hands up, and so that's good. I would just say that this would be a formal recommendation of the working group to Congress and to HHS. And so, Lyndon, in terms of the teeth that are in this and how binding this is, I would say that there's, something that would be a very high priority to us. And I can just say on behalf of CDC that we are very, very engaged in continuing this conversation. And we have much more to gain than we have to lose from not doing this. From our perspective.
Thank you, Ben. Leith?
Thanks, Holiday. So I'll circle back to, I think, maybe the framing of how I think there can be some continuity built into how we're viewing this non-FACA recommendation, and maybe a recommendation for wording here. I just want to step back and acknowledge that OIDP, which is an office in OASH, has been the administrator and has been driving the work for the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group since inception, and has taken and shepherded and built that trust as I think touch point with the wider community. And is incumbent to, I think, transition that into the next phase towards implementation. So when Ben mentioned that piece with regards to, maybe Leith could chime in with regards to science and medicine, I think that's where I might have a recommendation is it would still be all of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, because as you've heard, Jim and Kay have quite a bit of wisdom to share in this space. And I think we're building on that pre-existing relationship as we move forward. So maybe going back to the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health rather than strictly defining it as OSM would be a good move. And I don't know how that maybe does a temperature check with the external community, but at least it, when we tie it to the individuals that have been helping develop ties over time, I think that maybe conveys or pivots in a direction that we're all kind of hoping to see. The other piece I would say here is that, while, I think there is a good bit of recognition that the perception of these as a binary or as co-equals that can coexist, I think is, in some form and fashion, I think both statements are true when it comes down to it and we pragmatically go forward, right? Because when it comes down to it, these recommendations aren't standing alone in a vacuum, right? We still have Congress, which is feeding, getting its information, getting its advocacy, getting its marching orders, or at least strong recommendations from other sources beyond the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. So independent of that, there's going to be requests for funding, requests for potential other advisory committees that are going to be competing and working together to help shape what's going forward. I think what's important with this is that we're realizing that there is a pivot in our collective mindset towards implementation. So no matter what happens kind of as an output here, I think that we should be mindful of the fact that that doesn't derail the actual work going forward, because these are recommendations, single point in time, and not necessarily reflective of where the how is going to happen. And I think that's been reflected in the past, is that we already know what's important, but the how is going to change. So I'll stop there and see that Ben has his hand back up.
Thanks, Lee. Ben?
Yeah, thanks. I would just say I'm fine with all of that, Leith. And certainly, I think when we said OSM, we were thinking about the national strategy, which is kind of focused in that office. I think it'd be fine just to say HHS Office of the Assistant Secretary of Health, OASH. Just leave it at that, because we've certainly been very much appreciative of all the work of OIDP, of Jim and Kay and the others, and they've done a really excellent job with this and don't have any complaints against the process over these last 6 years. So that's fine. Over.
Okay, Jennifer?
So I wonder if we're nearing the point where we should vote, but I would like to propose, I think the non-FACA recommendation is, we've done a good job of editing it, and Ben, I appreciate your updates here during the break. And this is immediate, so I would go ahead and make a motion that we vote on the non-FACA recommendation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kat, can we fix the edits right now real fast before we vote?
Sure.
On the FACA?
Yep. So I will delete this one, right? And because we're going to replace it with the one below. And then would you like me to accept the edits and so that it's clear what's exactly being voted on?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't do those in track changes. I did them manually because I didn't. So yeah, you may have to just manually get rid of the striked out.
That is no problem.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So we're voting on the non-advisory committee first?
Yes, once it's edited.
So Ben, is that, I'm not sure why did this one go down there? There we go. I don't know why it doesn't like that. Okay. Shall I read it out loud so we can see what it sounds like?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Okay. Request that following sunset of the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group, HHS's Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health convene regular virtual public co-creation or collaboration workshops and technical consultations in concert with relevant HHS operating divisions and with other relevant federal departments to share updates and receive feedback on progress made toward implementing FAC recommendations from the 3 reports to Congress. The recommendations should be tracked back to the goals, strategies, and objectives of the national strategy of which HHS/OSM is currently leading the development to ensure progress is made on recommendations as resources allow. Through these regularly convened public engagement sessions, public feedback should be collected and an open dialogue should be supported to ensure continued meaningful engagement with tick-borne disease community, including patients, advocates, scientists, clinicians, and educators. I missed the. So this should be changed to OASH, I think. The OSM here.
No, I think it's saying it OSM. Is that correct, Ben?
Maybe it was. Let's see.
Ben, you're on mute.
Maybe that, yeah, does that
that
stay?
can be, it could be either. It is OSM is in OASH. OSM is where the national strategy sits, but I think it's fine just to put HHS OASH there. I think that's fine, consistent.
Monica Embers had a group chat. She said, should it be called the non-FACA recommendation? Could the title be changed?
You know, we use FACA kind of incorrectly a lot. It is a non-federal advisory committee act, a non-one recommendation. It's also a non-federal advisory committee recommendation. I think her point was just changes that to non-FAC, right?
No, I think her point is that it doesn't sound good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like it's an immediate action. This is like something we want to go now, right? So.
Well, it's just a recommendation. It doesn't. We use that distinction, but yeah, it's just an independent it's another recommendation.
Okay, so we could just have it as a recommendation.
Yeah.
Betty?
I'm just wondering, and it's instead of saying feedback, could it be input? Does it matter to people? To me,
yep. I think it's synonymous in my mind, so sure.
okay, so because to me, input is while you're still building, and feedback is after it's done.
Okay, so there's 2 instances of feedback. There's one here, and then public input. You probably want to change here.
Mm-hmm.
And what about this one up here?
Yeah, I'd love.
Yep, that's fine.
All right, and Leaf just put in that he's having issues. And so Leaf,
I might stay off video, but was there a request for input?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We were just changing some words there.
Got it.
Okay, so if that looks good to everyone, could somebody call a motion for a vote, please, in a second?
I move to vote for this recommendation.
Can I have-
second.
Thank you. Jim, can you take the vote, please?
Yes, I can. Just a reminder, you have the option of either voting yay, nay, or you can abstain. So when I say your name, please vote accordingly. Holiday,
Yay.
Lyndon,
Yay.
Monica,
Yay.
Betty, Betty, you might be on mute. I can't hear you.
Yay.
Jennifer,
Yay.
Sunil,
Yes.
Kirby,
Yay.
Ben,
Yay.
Rebecca, Dennis,
Yay.
Robert,
Yay.
Todd,
Yay.
Leith,
Yay.
Gabriella.
Yay.
The vote carries 14 yay, no nays, and no abstentions.
Thank you, Jim. Now regarding the rationale that Ben gave to us today, Lyndon actually thought maybe we wait and vote on it at the next one, since we just got it today, or would you guys like to wordsmith it and do it now? And then we can go to the FACA vote too. So, Kat, could you pull up the rationale of Ben's? Yeah, just so we can see it. Lyndon.
Could we see how the vote on the FACA goes before we work on the rationale? Because I think whether they both get approved or whether only one gets approved will affect potentially what we write in a rationale.
And that's a great idea. Okay, let's go to the FACA, please. Would somebody like to call a vote?
I move that we, I don't want, that we accept this recommendation.
That's not the vote that we're doing. We need to
Aren't
have
we,
a,
okay, that we vote on this recommendation, right, Holiday?
yes, we have to vote on it. We can't move to.
Yes.
Okay, can I get a second?
Oh, Rebecca wants it read.
Perfect.
I think it's good to have it read if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, sure. We request that Congress and/or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services sponsors a new federal advisory committee focused on the prioritization, implementation, and progress of recommendations from the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group's 2018, 2020, and 22 report and generate new recommendations as needed. This FAC would be made up by a diverse group of representatives of relevant federal agencies and public stakeholders, including patients and patient advocates, as well as clinicians and researchers who represent the full spectrum of clinical and scientific perspectives on tick-borne diseases. This FAC would be limited to meeting no more than 3 times yearly.
Thank you, Kat. Could somebody please second it?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Jim, can you take the vote?
Yes, Holiday. Again, just a reminder, vote yay, nay, or abstain. With that, I'll start out with Holiday.
Yay.
Lyndon,
Yay.
Monica.
Yay.
I'm sorry, repeat that, Monica.
Yay.
Thank you. Betty,
Yay.
Jennifer,
Yay.
Sunil,
Yay.
Kirby,
Nay.
Ben,
Nay.
Rebecca,
Nay.
Dennis,
Nay.
Robert.
Nay.
I'm sorry, repeat that, Robert.
Nay.
Todd,
Nay.
Leith,
Nay.
Gabriella,
Nay.
the vote does not carry The vote is 8 nays and 6 yays.
Who I missed, so that meant a public member voted nay as well?
That's correct. The public member that I had that voted nay is Kirby.
All right, so let's then go back to the rationale of Ben's, please. So does anyone have any edits? Betty.
I think we could make the front end about all the work that went into it. I don't know if we need to go into all that detail. I mean, because if we want to tighten this up a bit, that would be one place where I would cut some of the detail.
So what would you cut?
Over 70 recommendations have been made, and it goes to access to care, period. I would not go over, I would cut from over 20 down and maybe pick it up again where it's, well, more work needs to be done. No, I wouldn't even do that. I would just I would pick it up again where it says the process is now at a juncture. I would keep the first line, Kat.
Yes. So is it this, what I've highlighted here, is that what you're suggesting to?
No, I want you to start, the highlight should start with over 20. There we go.
Okay, right here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll cut that and it can be put back as people, you can discuss.
Ben?
I was just going to concur with Betty that when I wrote up the recommendation, I just want to make sure it was fully explained. But I think for the purpose of this, it can be abbreviated quite a lot.
This is Sunil. Can I change my vote? I'm sorry, I didn't consider the rationale carefully.
I don't know that, Sunil. Jim?
I'm sorry, what was the question, Holiday?
Sunil wants to change his vote from the previous vote on the Faka. Is that correct, Sunil?
Correct.
It has no bearing on the final outcome on the vote. Certainly, if anybody else can, if Sunil is allowed to change his vote, any of the other members certainly could change their votes too.
So should we have a revote then?
I would say
on
yes.
which?
On the Faka. Lyndon?
I had a separate issue, so we should deal with this now. So,
Okay.
Sunil, you said the rationale made you reconsider.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't right. I didn't pay attention. I didn't read the rest. Sorry. Yeah.
This rationale.
Yes.
So did you want to vote on this one or the FACA?
This one. This is the new FACA, right? This is the
No, this is the non-FACA request.
oh.
And we haven't voted on this yet, Sunil.
Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. So
Yes, we did.
we did.
We voted on the recommendation, I think. I don't think we voted on the rationale. Is that right?
Yeah, we didn't vote on the rationale. So
Okay.
Sunil, can I just ask a question real fast? Are you talking about Ben's recommendation that you want to revote on or the FACA?
This one, the FACA.
But this isn't the FACA.
This isn't the FACA.
Okay. I thought we had moved to that, but then maybe I stepped behind. Okay. This is the one which says that we want. Okay, so somehow we put up the non-FACA one again, right?
Yeah, we've moved on. So do you want to go back to the FACA that we just voted on?
That's correct.
Okay, Kat, can we please go back to the last to the FACA? So is this the one that you want to change your vote?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we just call for an entire revote. Could somebody please call for a revote? Lyndon, can you call for a revote?
Someone can make a motion.
Sure. I propose that we revote on the FACA recommendation as written.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Jim, can we revote, please?
Gabby has a question. We need to have discussion.
Gabby?
Yeah, so in my experience under Robert's rules, usually when votes are reconsidered, there's a move to reconsider the vote. And then if the majority agrees, then the vote is done again. We don't just move to vote again. But that's just in my experience. Maybe we're operating under a different version of that.
Hey, can you provide comments?
I'll chime in here. Gabby's right. You guys have a vote and took that, so that's a solid vote. Usually when you're calling for the question, that's when it comes into play if there are some mitigating questions that members have. If there's a need for a new vote for consideration, then there's a motion, it's second, and then you guys are voting. But that first vote is not just, you just call for a vote again.
So we need a motion to reconsider the vote.
Could somebody please?
That is correct.
I'm making that motion.
Thank you. Betty, could you please make that motion?
Yes, I move that we reconsider the vote on the Federal Advisory Committee recommendation.
Can I have a second?
I have a question.
Yes, Todd.
Yeah, or I guess could Sunil, so he obviously has a concern. If he could expand on what his concern is, that'd be great. That way I can see what he's looking at as well.
Sunil?
Yeah, my concern, it almost like when I read the the first paragraph here, which says the one that says we request that Congress, I thought that you were asking for and maybe I'm wrong about that, two parallel efforts. One was Ben's non-FACA effort, and then this would be a parallel effort. But then when I read the rationale, I realized that that would be essentially like a fourth tick-borne disease working group. And to me, I don't,
Betty, can you go on mute?
which is why I thought that I would vote against a new FACA.
Okay, so Jim and Kay, so now are we voting to decide if we're going to revote again?
Did someone make someone made another motion? to
Yeah.
vote, but it needs to be stated what you're voting on, what that motion is. It has to be a full motion. Like I move to XYZ, and then if there's a second, and then you call for the vote, or you call for question, and then you can call for the vote.
I'm still not sure that Sunil has straight in his mind the difference between the two, because his rationale supports the fact he would like the non-FACA over the FACA. So before we even do the revote, could we be sure that we're all needing the revote?
So Dennis, I think Sunil voted yes for the FACA, and now he wants to change it to no. So that's why he wants to vote again.
That's not a why, that's what his action is. It doesn't explain the why, and his explanation of the why confused me.
Sunil?
So, okay, so we had two votes, right? One for the non-FACA events mechanism, one for this one, which is called a FACA recommendation. Those two are not mutually exclusive. Are we voting as our committee here that we want to do one or the other, or we could potentially say we are recommending two processes going forward?
Yes, you can vote yes on both. You can vote no on both. You can vote for one. You can vote not for one. So you can, it's two different votes.
Correct. They're separated. It's one vote for one action, then a separate vote for the other action.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I still, would like not to change my vote on the second one if it matters. Yeah. And it may not matter because, like I said, the motion is carried. Like my point of view is that we don't need two parallel mechanisms.
Correct. So the motion has already carried that it did not go through. So I need to know specifically from you, do you want to vote, or are we keeping it as is?
No, it's fine. I mean, my change of vote is not going to change. It's not going to alter the vote. So, in order to keep things simple, we could just leave it as is.
Okay. So, Kay, can we leave it as is, even though there's been motions brought to the floor?
That first vote you can leave as is because it was carried. The question is, there was another motion that was made. I did not hear a second. So we just need to close that bow on that before you proceed. So,
okay, there is no second that has been made for that. So can we close that? Okay.
You can. There was no second to the motion. You can.
Okay. So can we go back to Ben's rationale, please?
So Holiday, what I was originally raised my hand for was I was going to propose that we table this and go back and look at the rationale, have Ben work on it and deal with it at the next meeting, since as it's being pointed out, it could change considerably and be considerably shortened. So rather than edit here in real time, since it's a short section anyways that we can vote on quickly next session, I would suggest that we table it for now, the rationale.
But Lyndon, the concern was if we had depending on the other vote. So given how the other vote took place, I think we're nearly done and would urge us just to take a few more minutes to finalize it.
Okay, that's fine. If people don't think it'll take very long, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, if my opinion matters, I'd prefer to kind of work on this a little bit and rather than just do it on an ad hoc, but that's up to others. It's just my thought.
Okay, so let's try and stay with us for a second, just because so we can kind of button this up. I know Betty, your hand was up, and I'll get to you in just a sec. But Betty, what you didn't want in, did that take it out? Yeah. So Kat took that out. Okay, Ben, will you please look at this? And everyone just look at it and see if there are any more edits or if there's anything else we need to do with it, or we can vote on this. Betty.
I think now that this is passed, I would get rid of continuing the current working group comes at significant cost. That sounds kind of whiny.
Well, it's the rationale for doing this. I don't know.
Well,
Gabby.
Yeah, so I kind of see where Betty's going with her comment that Congress is not going to know that we had two recommendations on the table, and that this one was voted and that this one was drafted as sort of a counter to the other one. So I think there might be a way to kind of restructure the language so that it makes this one kind of stand on its own and not sort of sound as a rebuttal to the other recommendation.
I agree, Gabby. Thank you. Jennifer?
Along the lines of the point that Ben is trying to make, I think that we could say, in recognition of the committee's values to ensure prudent use of taxpayer dollars or something like that, that we're, trying to allocate scarce resources effectively. I don't know, something like that. That might address this concern about being efficient.
Dennis?
I see both points of view. I like Betty's take on it. It's not really about the money. I mean, who cares about the money? And I think that I would if I had to pay for it, of course. But I mean, I don't think that's the key of the issue here. And I think the next sentence, this work detracts from time and resources. I think that is redundant. So I don't think you need to have the cost part in there. So Ben, I know that it built the logic. I just don't think it's necessary.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I feel like this whole thing was written as a binary against the Faka recommendation, and we can keep wordsmithing, but I think what we're doing is just trying to take the negative language out instead of painting this in the light that I think we intended, which is actually a positive thing. So I would suggest that we give Ben some time to work on this, because I do think we would want to say it differently than how it's framed right now.
I agree too, Rebecca, and I will get back. I could go to Dennis. I understand, time is of the essence, but I do feel like this is a rebuttal, and to let Ben come back and then we can vote it on the 25th, I think would be good, just because we've already voted on the recommendation. So now the rationale we can have more time for. Dennis, do you have something to say? I know your hand was up and then it went down.
No, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. So if that's okay with everyone, I think we table this, we give Ben some time, we come back on the 25th. And then now what we'll do is I will pass it over to Lyndon, and we will go through Access to Care chapter.
Okay, great. Thanks, Holiday. Whenever you're ready, Kat, if you could switch to whiteboards, that'd be great.
Okay, yep, just a second here.
Betty, do you have your hand up? And you're frozen. Okay, hopefully Betty gets back on, because I think we're going to need her for this.
Am I not on?
Oh, you had your hand up and then you looked like you were about to say something and you froze.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. My internet's been really crappy today. Spotty, I should say.
We're going to have to edit you out in post.
My apologies. I'm sorry.
No, just kidding. I think we all know where you're coming from.
And that's a fish anyway.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm sure you meant the fish, yes.
Yes, and they're in my lake. So good. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, Kat, why don't you kick us off with the new comments that have been made on this chapter?
So a lot of the comments actually appear to be from me, but they aren't really. Last week I met with Betty and Rebecca to go through the chapter to just clean it up a bit, because and sort of annotate what changes were made. So so everything that is in the margin is basically a reflection of what we talked about last week together. So
oh, and actually, before we start that, now that I'm remembering this, I remember this was a chapter that we had not yet voted officially on many of the recommendations. And I know part of that was waiting for the decision on the Faka request. And so Betty and Rebecca, can you take us through now that we've voted on that and there's not going to be a Faka request, can you take us through which are the recommendations you want us to focus on? Because I think we'll need to vote on those recommendations maybe first and then go through the other stuff.
Sure, it's 1 and 2.
Okay. So now you're going to keep 1 and 2 the way that they are, because I think if the Faka had passed, I think 1 was going to go away. Is that right? I can't remember.
Right. Yeah, see, it's all, we had to write ours on contingency basis. So here we go.
Betty, and I think it's 1 or 2 because these were written as contingencies too, based on how things go, right?
Yes.
Right. So which one do you want now based on the fact that the Faka is not going in the report?
1.
Okay, great. So we should take a look at that. Holiday, your hand's up.
Yeah, so why don't you do this? I do have a couple edits that I did on paper. So once you guys do all this, they're just quick little ones.
So Kat, can you read the recommendation as they want it now? And I can't remember, did we vote on any of your recommendations?
We voted on 3, 4, and 5.
Okay, so the ones that we'll need to vote on are 1 and 2.
And a little, we voting on 3 because when
okay.
Drafted in, you'll see it. That's fact.
Okay,
that should be a yes or no.
Okay, so we'll work through the recommendations first, and then maybe we'll have a vote on the recommendations before moving to the rest of your chapter.
Okay.
Kat, can you read recommendation 1?
Yep, sure. Recommendation 7.1, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to sponsor a federal advisory committee on tick-borne diseases that will conduct a comprehensive review of tick-borne disease information on DHHS websites and training materials to determine whether they best reflect the current state of the science, independently analyze clinical trial evidence in detail, and appropriately delineate areas of scientific and therapeutic uncertainty.
Thank you, Kat. So let's open this part up for discussion. Ben?
Yeah, well, I guess I have a couple of concerns. One is to review, to conduct a comprehensive review of tick-borne disease information on websites and training materials. There's a process in place to do this. It's called the Information Quality Act. And it actually provides an official government avenue to be able to review information and to challenge that or to discuss that. And I think, again, establishing another federal advisory committee, I think that, we could accomplish the same thing through the other listening sessions, and sorry, I shouldn't have used the term listening sessions, through the co-creation activities and things like that, because those are looking at previous recommendations. And this is highly relevant to all the previous recommendations that have been made.
Betty?
So Ben, the system that's available to us is cumbersome. We do not, when you submit, and people have tried to submit, you do not know the expertise or the biases of the person responding. And so I looked at one on a subject I'm well versed in, it's management of tick bites, and I saw that the reviewer who did the reconsideration equated a medical society evidence-based peer-reviewed guidelines as review from an advocacy group. and also found it hard to believe that a randomized controlled trial could be anything but high quality evidence, when in fact there's many ways that grades get dropped down. So to me, it seemed that that particular reviewer lacked the expertise to adjudicate that complaint. And so that becomes a problem. And quite honestly, some of the things like, how do we say you didn't consider scientific uncertainty, or how do you write that in that format? It really doesn't accommodate what we need. And if we did this well, and it could be done well, a couple of subjects at a time, CDC then would have the foundation to write its own guidelines on treatment, and they wouldn't have to subcontract it out. Because getting the evidence and understanding the science right is really critical to clinician education, and clinician education is what gives patients access to care. So I think it's really a critical tool, and I don't know how else to get it done efficiently. I think this would be more efficient than by line go web page and any module.
Betty, you're dropping out a lot. It's very difficult to hear you. I wonder if you might be able to call in or turn off your video to improve the bandwidth.
Okay.
Because I think we're missing a lot of your comments.
Sorry, I apologize. So I was just to summarize, the process that Ben said is cumbersome. Allow you to get some bigger themes across. It's more of a one specific line. So are you hearing me now?
No, Betty, I think you're still dropping out. Do you want to try calling in on a cell phone?
Yeah, can you give me that number, or
okay?
Maybe Rebecca can pick.
Yeah, can you pick up while we wait for Betty to call in on another line? And can somebody from RLA give Betty the call-in number? Rebecca, do you want to finish?
I don't know that I have much more critical to say. I think Betty has shared, and she, she knows, she has more expertise and details on this than I. But I think the expressed concern is the process for that review is somewhat cumbersome, and there's concerns about the actual expertise that's applied. I don't want to put more words in her mouth or speak for her at this point, so I'm going to let her dial in.
Okay.
I don't have a number to dial in on.
Yep. Megan or Mike, can you get Betty a number to dial in on?
Yes, I'll message it to you, Betty, and it should also be in the calendar invite.
In the meantime, Ben, do you have a comment?
Yeah, what I would say is if you just drop the phrase here to sponsor a federal advisory committee on tick-borne diseases, and just say for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to conduct a comprehensive review of tick-borne disease information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's covered under the other recommendation that we already voted on, which is to look at the recommendations that have been made to assess the progress that's been made, and to gather input in a very public, transparent way on how those recommendations have been implemented, right?
And I don't know if Betty can hear you now or not.
I can hear, but I'm still dialing in.
Okay. While we wait for you to dial in and respond, maybe we can hear Todd's comment.
Yeah, I'm just leery of the phrase independently analyze clinical trial evidence. Guess I'm kind of conflicted here. Is, independently, it's fine. Anybody can look at what's available, but I guess I guess my reservation is if it suddenly becomes at odds with something that was approved through the FDA where they looked at all the clinical trial evidence, or I guess in opposite disapproved. It's just a slight concern. I'm not saying we have to take it out, but I think I just have to be careful, at least from the FDA perspective.
Thanks, Todd. So Rebecca, I don't know if Betty can answer yet, but Rebecca, do you have thoughts as to taking out the request for a federal advisory committee and making it or Ben's suggestion to make it just that HHS sponsor this?
Is Betty back on?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Well, the number that I got, the dial-in number wasn't correct, the meeting number. So I've been listening. And can you go back to the Todd? I'm sorry, Todd. Can you tell me a little bit what you're?
Yeah, no, so I'm just throwing out a little concern on the independent analyzing clinical trial evidence. It's I guess maybe you have it down further in the rationale too, is I just want to be careful that there's not, you're not directing HHS to be at odds with HHS.
Well, what I would like to do is oftentimes the original trial evidence was taken at face value, but when you drill down into it, it doesn't say what it says it says. And so I want us to take fresh eyes so that we can be sure that the science says what we think it says. And if it doesn't say what we think it says, that we can respond accordingly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there should be, you should always go back and look at the science, regardless if anything's approved or disapproved. It's just that the way it was, like I say, I had some concerns that by having the Faka, you're almost putting HHS against HHS if the recommendation out of a Faka is to overturn something that has been looked at.
Is there language you want to propose, Todd, to substitute for that?
I wish that's the thing, is that I'm throwing out a problem and I'm not proposing a solution, and I apologize for that. Yeah, I don't have anything good. It's, it was just a concern. I'll think on it. If I can come up with something, I'll definitely let you know.
Okay. Kirby?
Well, just a question. Who actually reviews the clinical trial evidence now? I mean, like the FDA has their own independent advisory board on immunizations, for example. So,
yeah,
trying to answer this is kind of hard without understanding exactly how this is handled to begin with.
So it's all right. So with the FDA, it's going to be the reviewers that are going to look at the clinical trials. Based on what, if it's therapeutics or vaccines. So it's that's their independent, that's their independent analysts. But at the same time, I'm also advocating that somebody should continue to look at these things. Regardless what has been approved or disapproved, there should always be a continuing look at the science. So that's why I'm not advocating completely to take it out, because I think it is important to continue to have that oversight. But yeah, I guess I'm just not being clear here on what
I think we understand what you're saying. And if you want to think about it and come back with some language, that would be great. Dennis?
Yes, so thank you. This has come up every one of the three reports, and every time we talk about the clinical trials, we have this remaining difference of opinion. The other point was, is there a process for looking at the data? And there is. It's a scientific process and publications and rebuttals, and there have been numerous ones, and they continue. To me, another FACA to look at the data interpretation isn't going to solve the problem of the differences of opinion, and it won't until we have new evidence. And so that is why I have been pushing so much understanding pathogenesis in order to know what you need to do to make things better. And beating to death the data from the prior trials is not the way to go, in my opinion. So I don't think the FACA to have other people look at it will address the key problem, which is with the approaches we have now, we need to focus on better diagnostics and better understanding of the pathogenesis in order to know how to intervene.
Great, thanks, Dennis. Todd, I'm assuming your hand is up from before, so I'm going to ask Betty. Betty, are you able to talk? Or was your hand up from before?
It's *6 to unmute on the phone. *6.
Oh, thank goodness. All right. You can imagine what it's like on my end. So Dennis, I appreciate that point. But where uncertainty is not reflected are in the training modules, where everything is cut and dry. And I don't know how to change that without, I just think it would be nice to have, you know, a fresh eyes look at this and then be able to translate the uncertainty across the agency's websites and training modules.
Thanks, Betty.
I don't think the current wording makes that clear.
Dennis, do you have a suggestion for a change?
My suggestion is this recommendation is not necessary.
Kirby?
Well, listening to the discussions, what they said is we're not asking for another federal advisory committee. At least some people are. It would be just HHS would conduct a comprehensive review and training materials to ensure they best reflect the current state of the science, including clinical trial evidence, and appropriately delineate areas of scientific and therapeutic uncertainty.
And so since you said that, I'll let you know that that's what 7.2 is.
Is it? Oh, okay. Well, then if that's the case, then we don't need this one, do we?
Well, I'll tell you why I think we need it, because I think it's the fox guarding the hen house.
Oh.
I mean, because HHS produced this, and so now I'm going to trust HHS to revisit it. I mean, it would be a trust issue for me.
Are there other mechanisms for bringing in other input without a formal federal advisory committee? You know, like.
And Betty, can I ask, so if I'm understanding correctly, HHS also runs the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. And if we stipulated a specific branch of HHS that has been running the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group to oversee this process, would that make you feel better?
You know, I really don't know how that would change things. I guess it would be better than nothing.
Because they would be
Rebecca,
the ones. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I thought maybe Rebecca could weigh in.
Rebecca?
I don't know that I have much to say here. I feel like it's one of these recommendations takes it externally to a federal advisory committee, as I understand it. The other one keeps it within the HHS process. And so there is, in the HHS process, there is an external look. And one would hope that that looks at all of the science as it is currently, what's available, and re-scrutinizes what we're saying publicly. I guess, you know, in the long run, I absolutely agree. You know, it's the reasons I've asked for what we're doing around diagnosis and treatment repeatedly throughout the last 2 days is to see that we're getting there, because I really feel like that's some of that is the crux of the problem. But in the interim, it's going to take time to get to those things. If there's better science that should change how we are treating patients right now, waiting a long time for those trials to end, it puts a lot of risk to the patient population. And I think that's where I'm a little bit stuck here on what makes the most sense. And I'm being very transparent in my perception of where we stand on these things.
Holiday?
Betty, I think from how the Faka vote went down, I think you need to probably remove that you want a Faka, because I don't think this recommendation will get passed. And I think what Ben suggested, and I don't know if you heard what he suggested because you're having technical issues, but to just get rid of the Faka and have HHS help with what you're asking. But I also think if this one and number whatever you told Kirby 7 are so much alike, maybe 7 point, I think you said 5 or 6, that maybe
two.
Okay, 2, sorry. That if you can get them together, great. If not, I would definitely get rid of that you want a Faka, because I don't think your recommendation will pass with this group.
So I thought the way I understood it was that 7.2 was the contingency if the Faka passed, right? So it was always intended that it was either going to be 1 or 2, or did you want both 1 and 2?
No. So if 7.1 didn't pass, then here comes the fallback position.
Okay. Can we read the fallback position, Kat?
Sure. Recommendation 7.2, provide funding for U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to conduct a comprehensive review of tick-borne disease information on DHHS websites and training materials to determine whether they reflect the current state of the science, independently analyze clinical trial evidence, and delineate areas of scientific uncertainty. The review should include meaningful stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Kat. So this sounds much more like what Ben and Holiday were proposing there. And so I guess one of the possibilities is that we hold an either or vote on these, unless people want to do more wordsmithing for either of them. Gabby?
Yeah, I was just curious to hear from Ben or anyone else in HHS how recommendation 7.2 would be carried out if this is voted on in the context of the system or the process that CDC at least has in place already.
Ben, I'll give you a chance to reply if you can.
Yeah, I'm thinking through this right now. I think I would sort of defer to Leith on this because it's a recommendation for HHS. Maybe you'd have thoughts on it, but I presume that yeah, I mean, I'm just not sure what this looks like. I'm just not sure. I'd have to think about this a bit.
Leith, since Ben called you out, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, I'll take a quick stab at it, but in the interest of not putting a foot in my mouth, I think, when it comes down to it, it is quite broad, and I don't know what the actual execution would look like for this in practice.
So what if we narrowed it, Leith? What if we narrowed it to just biggest bang for the buck, EM rashes and persistent Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease, whatever term we're using there. It's just, and I say EM rashes because that's what the bulk of Lyme patients present with initially, and then the other because that's where the controversy is. And if we looked at those two subjects, I think it's really doable. And if we wanted to throw in another, but I wouldn't want to load it up with too much because it is a lot of work. But I think it'd be important work to get done.
So Jennifer, I see your hand up, but I'm going to let this thread play out for a little bit. So Ben and Leith, does narrowing the scope of this help with how you would envision this might work?
I guess maybe Betty could repeat that again, but it sounds like you're just saying for HHS to do a comprehensive review of CDC's webpage and training materials relevant to EM rash and what else was it, Betty? Because I don't know. I don't know that FDA addresses these things. I don't know. Dennis would have to comment on NIH. I'm not sure what they say. And so I guess the question is, can you state again how you narrowed this?
Sure. So I would like to have a comprehensive review of the state of the science and the clinical trial evidence relating to erythema migrans rashes and the persistent Lyme disease / chronic Lyme disease, so that we can really look at the evidence related to those two particular subjects, and then make sure that the teaching derived from that evidence reflects the evidence, so that what we're teaching really matches up with what the underlying evidence is.
Jennifer, you've been really patient. I don't know, do you have a comment on this?
In regards to the last sentence, thank you, Lyndon. I was going to say it should probably say meaningful public stakeholder engagement. I think that's what you mean here, that we should clarify.
Thanks, Jennifer. I can see Ben and Leith in deep thought. Other comments?
Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy.
So Leith here. So I think part of where my thought process is going is, right, this is being narrowed to the extent that you're applying a large amount of resources for a very narrow topic area, where I think I start at the HHS level, I start to go, oh, how would this happen? Because I need stuff that's agnostic, that I can apply a scalable across multiple areas to justify, XYZ. Whereas I think, if we stand back and look at what it is we're actually requesting, it looks like it's a state of the science review, which I think there are redundant capabilities across various operating divisions and even in HHS itself it applied to the mission of those agencies, right? So like for FDA and their regulatory mission, for NIH, clinical research or basic science, around CDC and public health and potentially messaging and interfacing with the states, right? I think they all take on a different lens. They all have a different level of rigor and methodological approach. So I think that we end up not necessarily having something that would be I don't think the lever being pulled is necessarily the right way to get to the end state desired. And I think I'll stop there and before I kind of blather on too much. But it looks like Dennis might have had something since his camera went on.
Dennis, did you have something?
No, I ended my thought.
I threw you right under the bus. I'm sorry.
Okay. It sounds like to some extent there are avenues and processes at CDC or at HHS to make sure that this type of review can happen. It sounds like what Betty wants to ensure doesn't happen is that there are some roadblocks and it's cumbersome to make that happen. Is there a way that we can frame this request so that it would utilize, or that HHS would have the option to utilize existing pathways, so that we're not creating duplicative, structures for how to do this, but that this request, has the weight of the committee to say that this does need to happen? Todd?
So I'm wondering if we do take Betty's suggestion and narrow it down, would that, I guess this question goes back to Leaf, just because I like throwing him under the bus as well. So if we do narrow it down, will that provide the cover you need in order to scope it?
I'm sorry, what was the last word you used there, Todd? I didn't quite catch it.
So would narrowing it down, making it very narrow to what Betty suggests, would that take care of the issue that Leaf brought up with, well, it seems broad, but how am I going to do this? If Congress takes a recommendation, says we really want this very specific part. Now Leaf he's got his marching order at that point. He's got that specific part that it can be applied to. Would that solve the issue here or not?
Well, no, I think at that point, if you have something getting written into appropriations, right, and it ends up looking like there's going to be somebody getting tagged at the end of the day, there's going to be identified upstream from me, somewhere, the powers that be will start to farm these things out to the appropriate division, the appropriate center, the appropriate office or division, right? Where you will find somebody getting pinned with the rose. I doubt very much, given kind of the scope here, that would live within OASH. Now, if there was something that required coordination, collaboration across multiple operating staff divisions and potentially looped in interagency, then sure. Or along the lines of doing Faka work, then sure. But I couldn't say, definitively just because it got narrowed down, it would be going towards OASH. I do think that if it were narrowed enough and it came with the funding, then you would have the appropriate individuals, teams, staff identified that would kind of execute. But I don't know where that would live.
Okay. Gabby?
Yeah, so this is just sort of a reality check. Am I hearing then that from everyone who's spoken on the HHS side, that the issue may not be that there's no process in place to determine if their websites and training materials are up to date, but rather the processes are in place, but maybe they're not really moving at a pace that would sort of keep up with the current state of the science. And so maybe sort of including a focus or refocusing the recommendation on making these processes more efficient or effective, and so that the rate of keeping up with the science increases in pace with the science. Is that the direction that I'm hearing HHS thinks might be a more feasible strategy?
Ben?
Yeah, I would just say, I think, that's not, my assessment of it. I think what it really reflects is the fact that there is a very strong disagreement about the current state of the science, and there are two very different views on it. And so that's what I think. It's not that there's information that's not been looked at and evaluated. It's just like so many other issues today. They're very controversial, and there are different views about them. And to be honest, we've tried to address that at our website by saying such things that we accommodated from the previous report, that the state of the science regarding persistent symptoms in patients, with Lyme disease is unsettled, and that there is, that we encourage clinicians to think through this when they diagnose and treat patients, and that's spelled out at our website. So I don't know. It's just a little bit difficult to wrap my arms around this, how this would be conducted. I mean, it's a good thought, but I'm just not sure how it would be conducted.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. So while I think what you said is true from a practical standpoint, this request is agnostic to any specific viewpoint, I think. Betty?
Yes. Yes, that's the whole point, is everyone takes off their hats and let's look at the science. And so, for example, in early Lyme disease, currently people are using on the website European data to support US recommendations for duration of treatment. But yet on other places, we say of all the differences between Borrelia avzeli, the principal cause of EM in Europe, and Borrelia burgdorferi. So if the bacterium are different, then the information from Europe may not be generalizable to our population. So that's an area where we have to rethink what we're even willing to accept as data to enter into decisions about treatment effectiveness. So it really does take a little bit of pulling back and saying, how are we thinking about the science and its application?
Thanks, Betty. Can I, so for the people who are on the committee who understand how government functions, which is definitely not me, it sounds like what I'm hearing from the government side is that the way the request is framed is going to be difficult to put into action. Is there a way that you can reframe it, keeping the spirit of what Betty is asking for in a way that is more likely to happen? Todd.
So I have I guess a question for Betty is what the goal? I mean, what is the product here? So, you know, what we described, keeping the science, kind of taking off our hats. In a sense, you do that at scientific conferences, right? The science is put out and opposing points of view are also put out and everybody comes together. By doing it this way, what is the product that you hope to achieve?
Oh, thanks, Todd. That's a great question. So the product would be a specialty physician training that reflects the science. And the reality is that the playing field hasn't always been level. And so it's hard sometimes when you're taking a contrarian view to get beyond editors and peer reviewers. But, you know, from time to time you do break through. And so, but there's an echo chamber within the literature. So even if you break through with a paper, it's one paper versus, you know, 100 papers all reviewing and going back to the one or two original papers. So it becomes very difficult. But if we had people who knew how to really look, what is the science? What are the treatment trials? And how do we understand the treatment trials that were conducted 30 years ago based in today's era of how we run trials? I mean, it's just an important look back, but the end product would be to improve the clinician education that the government is putting forward.
Dennis?
Well, Betty, it seems to me like your primary issue is with the training. So what groups produce and generate the training and do the training that you could reach and work with at that era? Because I don't think the science is ever going to be anything other than what the science is. And the science is lacking in terms of what you'd like to see to make major strides forward and approaches. So who are the training groups you'd like to influence?
CDC.
Isn't it really the practitioners and how the practitioners are trained?
But the training is coming, I'm concerned about the CDC training.
How does the CDC train practitioners?
They have modules, online modules on Lyme disease. And and some of the website information. And so if you read our chapter, and this is not to beat up on the CDC by any means, because it's hard work. But when the CDC says something, it carries so much weight that it inhibits physicians from being able to exercise clinical judgment. And so that's why if we can make sure that what is being put out there really reflects the knowns and the unknowns, and it's the unknowns that don't get reflected. And if we did simply that, that would be very helpful.
Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to paste into the chat. This could be helpful. So if you look at the 2020 report, I've got it open right now on my computer, Chapter 7, Clinician and Public Education, Patient Access to Care. And recommendation 7.1 reads, recommend federal government websites and educational materials and seminars for clinicians, the public and public health departments, which discuss Lyme disease, provide information that the state of the science on persistent symptoms associated with Lyme disease is limited, emerging, unsettled, et cetera, et cetera. And 7.2 says to fund supportive, a directive for CDC to develop multi-level nationwide curriculum for Lyme disease for clinicians in training, et cetera, et cetera. These are two recommendations that are spelled out. And I think what Betty's calling into question is that we have done these, but she questions, how we've done these exactly and whether or not they really reflect the input that she would like to see in those. I would suggest that the recommendation that we just voted for and approved on to look at how previous recommendations have been implemented, that be done in a public, transparent process, that would allow for this to be done. And, I'll put these two recommendations into the chat for you to see, but it's in the 2020 report in Chapter 7, and it's recommendation 7.1 and 7.2. And I think that these could be done under the umbrella of what we just approved earlier in a public way with real input and an evaluation on how they could be done better. Again, it's kind of an example of how we've gotten redundant. We're recycling the same ones, and these recommendations get at forming a federal advisory committee to make sure this gets done. Where the recommendations are already here.
Right. So I take your point, Ben. The execution was a little problematic. I think one of the things is, is that the current modules have a very wide array of attendee. The audience is very, whereas we need things that are more directed at prescribers, because prescribers weigh things differently than other people who might have fallen under that first target audience. So I take your point on that.
So Ben, oh, sorry, go ahead, Betty. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm done. I'm reading Ben's chat.
Oh, okay. So Ben, is what you're proposing then to kind of dovetail this recommendation with what we just approved in what I'll inelegantly call the non-Faka thing, and spell out specific actionable items that would allow Betty and Rebecca to have what they're trying to ask for here in a way that is consistent with what we just requested?
I would say yes. And you could change these. I know I don't want to suggest we strike all their recommendations and findings from their committee report. I would just say that this work needs to be continued to reiterate these recommendations that have been done, and that these be reviewed and evaluated, something like that. I don't know. That could be wordsmith later, but like I said, you can read these. These are recommendations that have already been made. And so the recommendation in our current report 2020, which we just voted for, would actually include going back to look at 7.1 and 7.2, how they've been implemented. Have they been implemented, according to the quality that everyone wants? Not just did they get done?
Sure.
Right. So it's how were they executed? So, I'm happy to work with you, Ben, on, finding a way so that we get to that language. I don't know if we can do it
Yeah,
here and now.
I guess, I've let this go on a long time because I do think we need to get to some resolution so you can write your chapters on this. And so it's important, but I am cognizant of the time. So I don't know if we will have one more meeting, so we could push it off till then if you think that you can sharpen the language in a way that would improve it for everybody and make it more likely to happen.
Yes, we can do it.
Okay. Gabby?
Yeah, I remember when this current chapter was being drafted that the point came up about this recommendation 7.2, which is the alternate language to 7.1, being sort of comprehensive for all tick-borne diseases and not just Lyme disease. Even though the rationale kind of focuses on Lyme, I think it kind of opens up the scope to other tick-borne diseases and related conditions like alpha-gal. So I think that was another sort of aspect of this recommendation that I recall when the chapter was being drafted.
Sure, so that's kind of in the opposite direction of narrowing it down to EM and PTLD, or I forgot what we agreed to call it, but in any case, that's a good point, Gabby. So should we, Betty, I see your hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to agree with, we did want to be very inclusive, but then I only offered the narrowing if that was going to make the job doable.
Okay. So I do think that whatever ends up happening with this aim probably doesn't change the rest of the chapter too much. So we probably could table this for now, hold the vote next time, but the next time we absolutely will need to have a decision on this. And then see, so is that acceptable to people at this point, to the lead authors? And Ben, since CDC is the one called out, I think it would involve you a lot. Kirby.
So are they going to keep with 2 recommendations or try to condense them to 1, right? Okay.
I think the intention was always that it would be 1, and it was just which one it would be based on what happened with the Faka recommendation.
Right, so we'd get rid of 7.1. If that's not going to pass, let's get rid of it. And then perhaps Ben and I and some people who know government, because I don't, Ben certainly does, but we could have volunteers to get this next to where it needs to be. But you're right, it really doesn't change much of the chapter content.
Okay, thanks, Betty. Ben?
Yeah, I would just say, something like to continue efforts to update and refine, the information posted at government websites on treatment and care, patient care and diagnostics and things like that in supporting the recommendations from the previous reports. And could cite these 2 recommendations, 7.1 and 7.2, just saying that this work needs to continue and improvements are still needed, something like that.
Okay. That sounds good to me. But I think that does require a little bit more wordsmithing than we could do live here. So Betty, can you remind me, is there another recommendation we need to vote on?
Yeah.
You said there was a small word change in one of them?
Yes, it's go down to 7.3.
Okay.
So we're going
and I'm just going to make a note that this is to be deleted, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Here you go, Betty.
Okay, so when there was editing last time around, these words got eliminated. And so we just wanted to put them back in. We thought they were important.
So it's everything in purple?
Yes.
And I think this comment of mine does not belong with this recommendation. I'm not sure why that's.
Well, it is a change. So do we need,
Right.
if by changing the words, do we need to revote?
I think we probably do. Jim, do you want to weigh in here?
If the wording is changed significantly to affect the outcome, then it's best to vote. I mean, if there's any concern that the members would have with the changing of the wording would be different than what they expected, yes, there should be a vote.
Betty, looking at this now, can I ask you, how different is this from what's likely to come from your new 7.1?
You know, that's an excellent point.
If you want to think about that and
Yes.
work with the group, and we can, since we have to vote on the other one again anyways, why don't we vote on what you decide with this one, whether they can be combined into a single one. Sometimes I think fewer recommendations will pop more and carry more weight, so you might do better if you can wrap it into one.
Yep.
I'll
Okay.
just barge in here and say, Betty, this one addresses my concerns I expressed about the other, and I have much better acceptance level for 7.3 if it were the sole one.
Sure. So we can find a way to all to 7.2, which will now, so the one immediately above the HHS and this that Ben was talking about, and combine it with this, then we'll end up with one workable recommendation.
Jennifer?
We need to do both. 7.3 seems to be a great solution to the whole dilemma.
Oh, okay.
Jennifer?
Is there a recommendation 7.4? I don't remember.
Kat, can you scroll down?
There are more.
Yep, just one second.
That's
I'm just trying to
telehealth.
capture a little bit.
Okay.
The trouble, Dennis, with just this one only deals with persistent Lyme disease. And we might want to look at other topics in tick-borne disease. But the content is similar. Here's 7.4.
And this one, I think we voted and approved.
I like the divergence of opinion. It's just, I think that is the crux of it, and it's nicely stated here.
Oh, good. Then we'll carry it over.
The reason I'm asking is, and we may not have an answer today, but I'd like to look at the whole of the recommendations coming out of the Access to Care chapter.
Sure.
And
So
make
this one's
sure that
voted
they're
on.
beyond just
Sure.
chronic.
And I think there's one after this too. There's a 7.5, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And that was also voted and approved, I think.
Right.
So I'll propose this. Betty, Rebecca, why don't you go back? Anybody who would like to weigh in and participate, but it sounds like Ben should, since CDC has been the focus of some of this, work on shaping a revised 1, 2, 3 in some sort of manner. And then we'll table all of it. Jennifer, it will, we have a very short timeline for this next one. So it'll be available to all of us in less than 10 days. So we should all take a look at it then. Ben, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just, you nailed it.
Okay, great. Holiday?
So I have some edits for the chapter, but should we just wait until we do it the next time?
Let's
Oh,
see
we
what
gotta
we can,
decide.
let's do the chapter now, since we do still have like 40 minutes or 50 minutes. I would propose, let's get through as much of the chapter as we can, put it to bed, even if we don't have a final vote on the chapter. That way it'll be that much easier for the next one. And we can talk about how we want to do the next set of edits. Like, we may want to clean up everything and just make it quick to show what the changes have been, to make it easy to go through the chapters in the next time, rather than leaving all the comments in. I don't know what's going to be best, but if that's okay with everybody, let's move to the chapter and then the comments on the chapter itself. Kat, can you take us through them?
Sure. Yep. So at the start of the chapter, there were during the July meeting, there were several requests for more inclusion of alpha-gal syndrome and tick-borne diseases other than Lyme disease. So there are several revisions, I think, throughout that address that comment. So that's just noted here. And then I removed all those comments from the July meeting. And then we've just sort of outlined where things were moved. Yeah, so this content really, there's also like comments around health equity. So that's been featured more prominently in this chapter. So this is just one of the areas where that was done, I think. And Betty, you can add in, I'm just sort of, this is based on our conversation the other day when we were going through these.
And Jennifer, I see your hand up. Do you have a new comment?
Yes, regarding that very first sentence at the beginning. Yeah, thanks. Leith and I were actually talking about this, and I'm sorry that it didn't get included in here, but limited access is not a health disparity. And the way, yeah.
So maybe I can hop in just quickly here. So the observation I brought up to Jennifer was that, the upstream health inequity leads to an outcomes disparity, right? So you can have an inequitable access to care or inequitable access to competent care that leads to a downstream poor health outcome, which is your health disparity, right? You have disparate health outcomes, you have an upstream inequitable access. So it's kind of the vernacular, kind of the public health speak, but that's the way to maybe think through it. And that's the text that I kind of provided Jen. So I'm wondering, maybe Jen, can you pull the draft text I sent earlier and maybe get it into the chat, and Kat can take a look at that?
And Rebecca can speak to this, but I pulled this language about what's a health disparity and what's from the CDC website itself.
Would a fix be, instead of just chief among these, to change that to chief among the causes of these disparities is limited access to knowledgeable clinicians?
So in the CDC website, it says social determinants of health like poverty, unequal access to healthcare, lack of education, stigma, and racism are linked to health disparities. So there's a nuance here. And I actually lost your wording when I had to sign off a while ago.
I just put it in.
Okay, great. There we go. So the proposed rewrite is patients with tick-borne diseases and illnesses experience multiple inequities in healthcare access. Chief among these is limited access to knowledgeable clinicians.
Betty, Rebecca, are you okay with that language?
I'm okay with it.
Sure.
Great. Holiday, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I know we were going through, Kat, I just want to ask you a question. Do you want to go through all the ones that are in there and then go through the paper ones after? That's what we did before.
Sure. Yep. And I'm not sure that there are many comments from people over, during the comment period. So I think it'll be pretty quick, actually.
Great. That's what I thought too.
Yep. So we've gone over the recommendations. Right, and so this is just identifying, what types of changes have been made since July. And then there's some graphics, and they have been finalized. Yep. So there's been a few things moved around just for the purpose of to create, better logical flow. There's a comment from Betty.
That got fixed.
Okay. Yep, so just more explanations of the changes that have been made. And there was a request to move this content regarding community-based participatory research. So that was put into a more logical place. And then the conclusion is moved from another part of the chapter. So that's it.
Okay, great. I had something I was going to raise when you scrolled by. There was a section where there was a quotation from a physician, I believe, in there.
Mm-hmm.
Should that be in a call out box since we're doing stories and things like that? Should that be in a call out box rather than embedded in the text?
It could be. Betty, where do you recall what section that's in? I can pull it up.
Oh, it's probably physician barriers.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea, Lyndon. I didn't know if
clinician.
I didn't think about that.
Holiday, is your hand still, is that new or is that from before?
I'm just waiting to do my edits.
Oh, okay. I think you're up, Holiday.
Oh, good.
Well,
question.
Wait, let's catch my call out box.
Okay, here's the clinician encountered barriers.
Keep going. You're just going to you'll see it's in italics, so that'll help.
Okay, yeah, I thought I saw something like that.
And if you can't find it now, you can always do that decision
Yeah,
later, because it's just an editing thing. It's not
it's on page 19. There you found it.
I got it. Okay. It's good to make note anyway while it's happening, and because otherwise it'll happen quicker if I get it on now. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Okay, so on page 5, at the rationale, you guys are talking about access to care issues are not unique to TBD patients, but then down below, all you're talking about is post-treatment and PLD and CLD. I think you need to add in somewhere there TBD patients too. Like you need to just not be talking about Lyme, but other tick-borne diseases.
So this is specific to the telemedicine one, Holiday?
Yeah. Yep. So just in there, it says telehealth flexible to ensure that PLD, CLD patients.
Oh, sure. We could.
I think you just need to put in tick-borne disease patients too, like somewhere in there.
Yes.
Okay. And then, let me see. Oh, I love, just to let you know, your patient barriers to care, that image I really liked. Again, on page 11, it says many PLD/CLD and patients with alpha-gown syndrome. You also need to put in tick-borne disease.
Oops, sorry.
It's very specific. It says cannot find local clinicians. So you really, tick-borne disease patients needs to be in there because, most
Can you
Lyme
think of another tick-borne disease where they have to travel outside their locale?
right. So it says just many PLD, CLD, and patients with alpha-gal syndrome. Well, there's also all these other tick-borne disease. I think you need to encompass all the tick-borne diseases about finding clinicians.
But is there an example, Holiday, of where that's true, where someone with anaplasmosis has to travel to find a clinician?
Well, yeah, I mean, my daughter has 5 tick-borne diseases, including Lyme, and we have to travel to New York to see a physician, and I'm in Denver. So yeah, most Lyme patients have more than one tick-borne disease. And most patients I know, especially like here in the, in the center of the country, we have to travel to one coast or the other. There are no good tick-borne disease doctors in the state of Colorado.
And I would say for patients with severe manifestations of some of these diseases, they routinely get transported to specialized centers like the Babesia patients who need exchange transfusions or things like that, Rocky Mountain spotted fever patients.
Okay.
And then again on 21, you're just, again, it's PLD, CLD. I think you need to do tick-borne disease.
Wait, let's see what it's about before we generalize.
Can you read which page again? I'm sorry.
21 at the bottom, there are missed opportunities to provide accurate, comprehensive knowledge to clinicians, not only regarding the underdiagnosis of TBDs, but also the uncertainty regarding treatment. On the CDC and NIH website, CDC training models information about PLD, CLD is incomplete. I mean, truthfully, you could say that about all. And then, so I'm getting a little nitpicky here, and I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
On 23 on your graphic, so it says tick-borne diseases, health equality, Lyme disease. I know Jennifer would love if somewhere it could be like illnesses or alpha-gal, just throwing it out since it's there, but that's being really nitpicky. So I apologize.
On which one are you talking at?
The graphic on 23, the books.
Oh, okay. Sure. We could
just to throw in a little bit more so it's all covered. And then I think that's all I have. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Holiday. Jennifer?
Great. Thank you for the inclusiveness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
with
thanks,
that, were you gonna make that change on page 21? I wasn't sure if it got made, that Holiday added.
I'm sorry, where? That was a lot all at once. Page 21. I have that Betty will revise to be more inclusive of TBD patients in this. Is that right? That one happened quickly.
I think
yeah.
Information about, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, this PLD, CLD goes to TBD.
Okay.
Right, basically.
Right here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you change it so it's correct, but we've marked it.
All right.
Great. Other comments from people? Jennifer, is that hand from before or? Okay.
Sorry, my comment was going to be my brain is a little bit fried, and so just
yeah, I'm with you on that. All right. Anybody else with a comment that they'd like to make on this chapter? So one question I have for the group then is, should we vote on this chapter or should we wait for the recommendations? Holiday's shaking her head no, wait for the recommendations. Okay, and I see Jennifer agreeing with that. Okay. So
yeah.
it sounds like we will wait then and vote on, take a good hard look at it next time, and we will have to come to a conclusion both on the recommendations and on the chapter itself next time. Okay.